Hey everybody, happy Tuesday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is Tuesday, February 15th. Hope everybody's having a great week so far. We've got an amazing lineup on today's show. We get things kicked off with a conversation between Alan and TJ Gonen, who is the head of cloud product line over at Checkpoint Software. Checkpoint just recently announced the acquisition of Spectral, which is an Israeli startup that specializes in automated code security. This is going to be a great addition to Checkpoint's portfolio, and so TJ and Alan talk about what the acquisition means for Checkpoint and for its customers. It's a great conversation. After that, Alan speaks with Jamie Arlen, who is the CISO at Avon. And Avon is, actually, Jamie is coming on to dispute a comment that the White House National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said. He called the use of open source software a key national security concern. Well, those are fighting words, and Jamie Arlen is on to beg to differ. And it's a great, great conversation. Definitely want to check that one out. After that, we have the Haunted Hacker podcast. This is part 2 of a 2-part conversation that host Mike Jones is having with Vidya Sekar, who is the Senior Security Service Engineer at Microsoft. They have a fascinating conversation that meanders all over the place, including talking about the future of mankind, AI, technology, friendships, hardships, diversity, and so much more. So it's a great, great conversation, and really kind of shows some insight into the personalities of both of them. So it's definitely worth checking out as well. After that, we have the next installment of our CISO Talk series. In this one, we have the host Mitch Ashley speaking with Anthony Johnson over at DelveRisk and Mike Rothman over at Securosis. They discuss the changing role of CISOs and how they balance business and security needs, as well as how CISOs are bridging that communication gap that has always existed between the executive team and IT teams. Great conversation all the way around with that one. After that, we have our Something Old segment. This is from our very recent Predict 2021 virtual conference. It's a 2-day event and just knocked my socks off, and we had a great, great round of conversations happening during those 2 days. This one is a presentation. It's actually a panel discussion that, again, features Mitch Ashley with Techstrong Research, but also Tracy Reagan from Deploy Hub and a CDF board member, and Steve Chin from JFrog and Amir Kashansky from Armo. They discuss what we need to do to get our arms around this new component-driven software supply chain and how DevOps practices will shift in the process. It is a great, very, very insightful conversation, so you definitely want to check that one out as well. After that, I'm back, got the news headlines for you, and then I have a great conversation with Tim Grelling, who was the Director of Innovation and Security at Core BTS. We discuss the psychological element to cybercrime and the importance behind business leaders practicing their response to a breach through different prevention tests. So it's not just about being able to respond to a cyber attack when it occurs, but actually being prepared well in advance. And part of that is understanding the psychology behind the cyber criminal. It's a great conversation. After that, I've got the webinars preview for you, and then we have a double shot. It's 2 for Tuesday, folks, with View with Vizard. This first conversation Mike Vizard has with Kim Wines, who is the Senior Vice President of Marketing for Encore, and they talk about why secure software supply chains start with a security or software bill of materials. This is definitely a very relevant conversation. A lot of folks are talking about SBOMs these days, so Encore has its unique perspective, so they discuss that. In Mike's second interview, he speaks with Mirantis CEO Adrian Einel, and they discuss Kubernetes 2 years on. Mirantis actually acquired Docker Enterprise about 2 years ago, and so they're kind of doing a look back and where they are today with respect to Kubernetes. It's a great conversation as well. All right, that is today's lineup, and it's a great one, folks. I hope you can stick around for the entirety. We're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right, welcome back, everybody. Kicking off today's conversations is one between Alan and TJ Gonen, who is the head of the cloud product line over at Checkpoint Software. They discussed Checkpoint's recent acquisition of Spectral, which is an Israeli startup specializing in automated code security. So TJ and Alan talk about what this means for Checkpoint's software security portfolio moving forward, what it means to their customers as well. It's a great conversation. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another segment here on Techstrong TV. I'm really happy to have our guest on this segment, TJ Gonen, and I hope I pronounced that right, from Checkpoint. Hey TJ, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Hey Alan, thank you very much for having us.
It's a pleasure. Is that the right way to pronounce your name?
Yeah, Gonen, it's the right way. Yeah, TJ is the name that I changed so no one butchers it.
Well, I hear you. It happens sometimes. Hey, I as I mentioned to you earlier, I like the 49ers hat, especially in a week, where they had a tough game in L.A. The Rams are going to the Super Bowl in L.A.
The Super Bowl in L.A.
Almost made it.
But it's still
almost made
it's
it.
close, a lot closer than my team. So who am I to say anything? But yeah, no, good for them.
Anyway, though, we didn't bring you on to talk football, unfortunately. We're gonna talk security, and maybe that's better off anyway. TJ, why don't we start though? Why don't you kind of give our audience a little bit of who you are, a little introduction, what you do at Checkpoint, stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. So TJ, originally from Israel, that's a bit of the accent. Now in the US, I'm the vice president for cloud security at Checkpoint. So I run the cloud security business for Checkpoint. And been with Checkpoint 2 years, actually exactly 2 years since my company was acquired by Checkpoint a couple of years ago in the cloud security space. So
yeah, what company was that?
To talk about another acquisition. So it's an interesting time.
Well, it's the circle of life, right?
Yeah.
What was the company that was acquired 2 years ago? Your company?
Protego Labs. We were in the serverless security space. Yeah.
Absolutely, and of course, serverless is a huge kind of growth area right now. But that was 2 years ago, as you said, TJ, and congratulations to you on that. But we have a new Checkpoint which also is the way of the world. We have a new Checkpoint acquisition to announce or talk about today. Why don't you share with our audience a little bit?
Yeah, so just a few days ago, we announced the acquisition of a company called Spectral Ops in the code security space. And it's really our move into the developer-first security world. We've been very busy in the cloud security space for the last 4 years, Checkpoint, through a series of acquisitions. Actually, the cloud security business at Checkpoint started with one acquisition, a company called Dome9.
Sure, I know the Dome9. Who was the founder of Dome9? Not Zohar.
Yeah,
I knew him when he started Zone9.
There you go. Yeah, so awesome company. So that sort of started the journey. Then a few acquisitions later, including my company, and now Spectral Ops. That's the fifth acquisition we actually do in the cloud security space. So I think one of the things that we found out relatively early is that cloud security is almost trying to reinvent all of security, reinvent it for the cloud, and trying to do 30 years of security in 4 years. And it's very hard to move without acquisitions. So
yes, it is. And
look, quite frankly, my background's security too. I've been in security 25 plus years. It's the reason I started DevOps.com. It's the reason I got so attracted to the whole DevOps thing, which was I really felt like it was a fresh chance for us to kind of right some past wrongs, right?
Right. Yeah, I agree.
A new beginning, if you will. Now, it's funny. I remember, I remember 2005 was probably the first time I heard the term cloud security, right? The Cloud Security Alliance and Chris Hoff and a bunch of folks at RSA were doing a meeting. And back then, we thought of cloud security as very sort of one-dimensional, right? But what we've seen now is, it's infinite in its variety. There's so many different aspects
very much
to securing cloud, and it's important. I was on with I think it was the Palo Alto folks yesterday with their latest cloud native survey. For the first time, their respondents, and keep in mind, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, TJ, right? So their respondents are probably people in cloud native, because it was a cloud native survey.
Right.
But they said 50% of their infrastructure, at least 50%, was in the cloud.
Yeah.
That's a big threshold.
It is a big, yeah.
Right? When you say, okay, half of organizations' infrastructure is in the cloud today, well, cloud security is really damn important then.
It is very important, yeah.
Yep. And so it's,
there's reasons for it to be complicated.
Yeah.
This acquisition, though, is a little different.
It is.
Than Dome9 or yours. Why is it different?
Yeah, so the biggest difference, I'd say, is the user. And one of the things that we found out over the last 2-3 years is there's a few trends that are coming down together. One of them is the shift left trend, which is very clear. That shift left is more of a security initiative, right? Security initiative says, hey, if I can fix something, prevent vulnerabilities before they hit the live environment, I should do that. Okay, so now if you want to shift left, then your tools are living inside the pipeline, the development pipeline. And they're supposed to be suddenly used not by security people, but by developers or DevOps people. So you suddenly develop tools that are supposed to be used by people who first, not necessarily security is their first priority. That's number one. Actually, it's probably not their first priority. Even if they care, it's not their first priority. Then number two, they just are totally used to different environments. And you find out as a security company, definitely like Check Point, that's been doing security for 30 years, and yourself and myself, who are older than 10 years old, as you can see, at least on my side, is that we know how to develop products for security people. And to develop products, security products for developers and DevOps people is just a different genetics. It's a different DNA.
No, it's a different animal, man.
It's a different animal. So we were looking at that and said, okay, so one, we think that developer-first cloud security is a real thing, and it's very important, and it's going to be a very big part, exactly to your point earlier, of the future of cloud security. So there's always going to be cloud security for security people, which is the runtime environment, checking out the actual cloud infrastructure, making sure that attacks are being blocked and all that good stuff. But when you're talking about developer-first cloud security, you're going to have a different type of user. You're going to need to integrate into different types of tool sets. You need to have a different types of genetics. So that's what we wanted to solve with Spectral, is exactly that. So these guys, I met them first time, and I said, literally, I had probably a moment where I said, okay, that's it. These guys just get it. They've built a product that developers love. They build a product that developers understand how to use. Just like, one of their customers told me, he said, I asked him, what do you like Spectral compared to the other alternatives, like Sneak and maybe a couple of others? And he literally said, listen, with Spectral, the first time I connected this thing, first it took me 5 minutes. The second thing I started to use it, everything was exactly where I expected it to be. And he actually used the metaphor of an iPhone. And I totally related to that, where with the iOS, everything is, you don't know why, but everything is exactly where you want it to be. You don't need to think. So they nailed down the developer experience, and it's not just the user experience, and they integrate with tens of tools right out of the gate. They integrate into the IDE environment. It's also one of the things that we as security people who develop products for security people take for granted, that you cannot take for granted in the developer world. I'll give you just a very simple example. Because we assume we're selling to security people, we assume that they're going to be okay with us screwing up once in a while. For example, false positives. Something will take a bit more time. It's okay, because they're security, that's their job. I mean, they don't have anything else to do except waiting for you to do your job. When you're talking with developers and you're going to scan code, for example, which is what Spectral does, the first use case was scanning for secrets, hard-coded secrets inside code, whether it's API keys, AWS keys, passwords, huge problem. Developers run really fast. They forget keys and secrets inside code. If I'm an attacker, that's the easiest way in. So now you have tens of repos, hundreds of repos, Git repositories, S3 buckets, logs. Secrets can be everywhere. If I'm a developer now, I'm pushing code, and I'm waiting for you to scan, and it's going to take 2 minutes. I'm going crazy already. 2 minutes, I'm going crazy. 5 minutes, I'm killing someone. 10 minutes, I'm out of this. I'm finding a way to go around this.
Yeah, right? I'm not doing it no more. Yeah.
So the spectral technology, that was really their core tech, which is really interesting. So if I keep it really, really simple, they have the ability to scan huge amounts of code for problems. Now, a problem can be secrets, a problem can be misconfigurations in infrastructure as code templates like Terraform, it can be a bunch of use cases, but they can do that really fast. Literally, we scanned, when we did the due diligence, we scanned our entire repo, the checkpoint repo, in 7 seconds.
Wow.
Entire repo, 30 years worth of code.
Holy shit. Oh.
7 seconds. Yeah,
holy
shit. No, it's holy shit. I had an holy shit moment also. It's that's like that. And they were saying, okay, something here is happening. Now, and it was also super accurate and it found very interesting things. So once you nail down the user experience or the developer experience, you understand how they work, you integrate with the tools, and you solve a real problem, because that is a real problem, and you solve it really fast. That's why we totally like them. So we're really looking at them, and just to make it even more interesting, to the point that we started with, how different of a DNA it is, because it's such a different DNA. We're actually inside my unit, inside the cloud security unit, we're leaving them independent. We're not touching them. I don't want them to start talking security to security people. You guys get developers, you understand how they work, you go, you do you. Just keep on doing that thing. I don't wanna dirty them.
I got to tell you, I'm sitting here. You know the word quelling? Have you ever heard that word in your life?
Yeah.
You know, because so I started DevOps.com in 2013. Right? At RSA, I think maybe it was 2015 RSA, I started what we call the DevSecOps event within RSA. It was Monday of RSA week. Right? And the idea behind it was to bring the security, the cyber, whatever you want to call it, the security community together with the DevOps tribe, with the developers and I got to tell you, the aggravation I had, 8 years ago, security people, they don't care about security. Exactly. They'll never care about security. They're stupid.
Yeah, they're the enemy. Yeah.
Right. And you know what the developers said, right? All they do is say no. They slow us down. They're a pain in the ass.
Totally.
It was like this. It took me 7 years of build because I believed that, no, security may never be their number one priority, but no developer I ever met raises their hand and says, I want to develop insecure code.
Right.
I like crappy quality. Right. I'm a crappy quality developer. You know what I mean? No one says that. They have pride in what they do.
Exactly.
The problem was we weren't giving them tools that they could use. They're not CISSPs. They're not Nessus or scanning.
They're not going to read your security incidents and try to do.
No, they're not compliance experts.
Yeah, exactly. You found a problem. Tell me how to fix it. Be very specific. Don't tell me how to fix it.
Because I want the quality.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think you're touching, Alan, on a very interesting point, because when you start to bundle these things or unwrap it, actually, let's say, one is, you're right, it's a new user. So we talked about it. I actually think that security people today, and I can tell you in our product group, that's exactly how we think. We think about the developer and the DevOps guy and the DevSecOps guy as a new type of user. He's a user to the security. So I need to cater to his needs. Now, what does he need? To your point earlier, he's not going to read forensic reports. He's not going to read attack patterns. That's not his job. His job is to write quality code that is not vulnerable as much as possible. Now, if you find a problem in what he does, tell him how to fix it and tell him in his language. His language is not a dashboard with a search. It's not his language. His language is a piece of code. Tell him that piece of code is problematic. If you replace it with that piece of code, you're good to go. And I think that it's such a different mindset. It's like, us security people, you've been around, I've been around. We immediately show dashboards and mouse moves. Who cares? The Spectral Ops guys, when they showed us a demo, and it's like a heart attack for any normal security person, because what do they show? A CLI. They open the CLI. It's like everything is black screen CLI. anyone from a security will say, I don't understand even what they're doing. But their customers, that's exactly what they appreciate. You integrate immediately. You talk with everything is API first. Yeah, there's a report somewhere that you can see in the background if you need, but everything works inside the development environment.
But this also goes, TJ, and we're probably over time, I apologize. But this also goes that we need to redefine the relationship between the security team and the DevOps developers and the people who use this kind of tool. Because what happens is, look, it's going to be the developer, maybe the DevOps or the SRE, but it's going to be those people who are instituting the changes to close down a vulnerability or, fix something.
Right.
That doesn't absolve the security team of responsibility. No one's saying, hey, security team, you're out of a job. Or, hey, security team, you don't got to worry about it anymore. The security team still needs that report, that forensics trail, if you will, to say, hey, yes, this was found, this was fixed, this is how it was fixed. And that again is yet another kind of special talent to make a tool that's easy enough or is in the DNA of the developer, but still gives the security team, the compliance team, what they need to sleep well at night.
That's why one of the best sentences I like, and we used it also when we announced the acquisition. We didn't invent it, people used it before. It's security tools that developers love and security people trust. That's the thing, right? That is
I may
so
steal
important.
that from you.
Still, it's yours. It's like 10 cents a use. And
okay, we'll put you down. We'll put you down.
But that's really where you want, right? That's really where you want, because and you just described the part of what does it mean for me as a security person to trust the tool that you're using and to trust the work that you're doing with it. And I think it's very interesting. I think in the future, by the way, Alan, and I think you're sitting with DevOps.com, just right on the money, because the future of security looks like this. You're going to have security people. They're going to more and more. That's where it's going to go. It's not tomorrow, but that's where it's going to go. The traditional security people, I call it the sandwich model. The traditional security people is going to be at the beginning in defining what is secure or what does it need to be. Is going to be at the end validating that security actually happened. The sandwich in the middle is going to be more than ever in the future, more than today by far developers. It's going to be code. Security as code. Pure security people are going to define what's needed. They're going to make sure that they're going to validate that it happened. These people in the middle are going to be more and more
people who make it happen.
Code people. Yeah. That's the new security engineer. The new security engineer knows how to code. And that's why we acquired Spectral. And that's why we're going to let them lead our developer first cloud security initiatives. And we're super excited about it.
I'm excited for you, and I'm glad to see Checkpoint coming out with this. This is great. Hey, for people who want to get information on Spectral,
on the Checkpoint.com website, you're going to find immediately on the homepage a link to the information about the acquisition, and you can also go and check out spectralops.io, the website of the company.
I love it. TJ, man, thanks for coming on and talking with us. Good. It was a great acquisition, man. We're going to be watching how this goes. I think it was a smart move by Checkpoint. Hey, we're going to take a break here on Techstrong TV. We'll be right back with some more interviews and news and information. TJ, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, we're back. Next up, Alan is speaking with Jamie Arlen, who's the CISO at Avon. Jamie's got a very interesting perspective on comments that White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan recently said. He called the use of open source software a key national security concern. Well, Jamie's not having any of that, so he's on the show to discuss with Alan his point of view and why he thinks that Jake's comments are incorrect. So, great conversation. Let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I'm happy to be joined once again by a friend of mine who reminds me that, we go back 15 years in the InfoSec world. My friend Jamie Arlen with Avon. Arlen, Avon, I got it. Jamie, hey man, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Alan.
It's been, we spoke, I guess it was probably about 4 months ago, I bet.
Something like that.
It's been strange times, but it's good to see a familiar face and old friends,
It's that time of year when we should be having breakfast together, and yet...
Yeah, actually,
Well, it will be a couple months now, right? I actually was just talking to my team, have we bought airfare tickets yet for RSA? Because at this point, it's day to day, right? But at this point, I'm feeling optimistic that we will actually go out to San Francisco in person.
It'll be nice.
The whole DevSecOps thing, the Bloggers Network, and all of that.
I haven't seen people in so long. It's going to be really great.
You and me both, man. You and me both. Anyway, hey, Jamie, for those who aren't familiar with Avon, can you give them a quick, before we jump into what we want to talk about, a quick background?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that Ivan does for, I guess, fun more than anything is provide a set of open source data products, databases, data visualization, data tools across a lot of cloud service providers. So we take that multi-substrate part underneath and make that kind of real and deliver an easy data platform for developers to use that is agnostic to the underlying platform and very much pro open source. We're a huge supporter of open source software, open source technologies.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what we want to talk about. Jamie, I was telling someone this the other day. Open source and security have been a thing for as long as I've been in security. As a matter of fact, some of the best security tools we've ever had in our industry have been open source tools. Snort, ClamAV, Nessus at a time, Nmap, all of these. But really, the focus on open source and security recently meaning the last 5-7 years, maybe more, has been not open source security tools, but securing open source tools and open source components and projects and so forth. And, I was brought up, or I came up in a time where kind of a prevailing thought was, well, open source is more secure because it has more eyes on it, right? The more eyes on it.
Yeah. Well, and that was sort of the counter argument to, well, if I buy a product, then it must be safe because I'm paying for it.
Exactly.
And that was the counter. Well, closed source, they do all their security checks, and you have a throat to choke if something goes wrong. Who are you going to call with open source, right? Ghostbusters. So look, we've known for a long time that there was a soft white underbelly here, is the bottom line. And unfortunately, over the last couple of years, this soft white underbelly's been exposed and ripped open more than once.
Yeah, at least a few.
Yeah.
The latest one was pretty painful.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was. But at some level, you got to just recognize that, look, all software has design flaws, bugs, whatever you want to call them, vulnerabilities, and open or not. But the open source software probably does present, a special use case, if you will, with some unique things you have to do, should do, want to do. it's your area of expertise, though. Let's talk about state of the art and what to do.
Well, I think the first thing you've got to sort of realize is that we've built this world where open source is the infrastructure of the world, and part of that was by design. Part of that was accidental. I've been a daily Linux user since 1993. This stuff has been around for a while. It's almost 30 years, right? And so we've grown up with this internet that was built on open source technologies. Going all the way back to the Apache project, and the first time that I was playing with this whole World Wide Web thing, it's built into it, and it's arguably most interesting because it doesn't really belong to anyone. It's practically a public good, and there's this, I don't know, we'll call it tendency. Whether it comes from business or whether it comes from politics, but there's this tendency to try and internalize things as, well, this is a problem for us, and it's really a problem for we. Right? There's an element of sort of Nash's law in this, that if we all choose less than our personal optimum solution, maybe we'll all win. And that's an area where I've definitely had some strong experiences in the past, and where Ivan has given me some real levers to use for that. We have an open source office, which is staff of around 10 or so, which in an organization the size of Ivan, we're 350-ish. That's actually a significant portion of our staff who are dedicated to working on the open source projects. So we pay their salaries, but they don't actually work on anything for Ivan directly. Even on my staff, I have a security developer engineer who spends 50% of his time working on my problems and 50% of his time working on the problems of the world. He's actually on the Internet Engineering Steering Group, so part of the IETF.
Right.
And so, I'm happy to pay his salary for sure, because I know that it's going towards this common good aspect. And where we get stuck in a lot of places, and whether we call it sort of late stage capitalism or what, it's always the what's in it for me, right? So I'm going to take everything that I can get, and I'm going to give only what I must, right? And that's a place where Ivan's made, I guess, a principled stand, and said, we want to make it better because everyone benefits. And this showed up a couple of times. I actually wrote a blog article about it called "Oh December" for us, because we had an issue with Grafana, and then all of the Log4j stuff, and then we had a follow-on where there was actually a problem in Flink, and in Apache Flink, and we were able to take the stance that even though this problem that was discovered in Apache Flink is not our problem, it's that the security researcher found it in our implementation of Apache Flink as a service. We went ahead and paid the bounty on it. Anyways, with the Grafana issue, we paid the bounty on it because nobody else was taking care of these things, right? Where you end up in this situation where you can either work with the rhythm of the community, work with the researchers and fix the defects as we find them, contribute the code back upstream, fund the researchers through a bug bounty program or similar, and more than anything, show our customers and show the rest of the world that this is something that you can take seriously. You can contribute in a meaningful way, more than just, patting yourself on the back and saying, well, I paid my dues to the Linux Foundation, so I'm good, right? Or CNCF or any of them. You can... They're
all Linux Foundation, pretty much. But yeah.
Under the hood, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. OpenSSF, all of it. There's also this sort of direct push that you can make, and it really becomes important when you consider, some of the stuff that's coming out of the United States around software bill of materials and software supply chain, and how open source software can contribute or detract from that supply chain because, the provenance of it might be questionable. Of course, when somebody asks that question, they obviously don't understand the concept of git blame, but we'll stay out of the technical weeds for a minute and go back to this is a problem that we need to solve for us. And that's different than a problem that I need to solve for me. Yeah. And I don't know how to help with sort of the push for that, other than, obviously taking advantage of the opportunity to talk to you about it. How do we, as an industry, whether it's the security industry or the cloud service provider industry or the users of open source software, which is at this point everyone, my television came with a GPL disclosure. Like it's everyone at this point. We all benefit from this common good. How do we maintain that common good? How do we take this awesome thing that we have? I mean, one of the best descriptions, this kind of veers into the land of the metaverses, but William Gibson described what his version of cyberspace looked like, and everybody sort of had their vision of it. But along there, one of the quotes, I think it was William Gibson, but it might not be, said it's a consensual hallucination. And I think that's a really apt way to describe the internet, right? That, you and I both remember before the internet was commercial. And, when the commercial internet exchange was a thing, right? And now, of course, the internet's commercial. It's where commerce happens. It's where all government services happen. It's how we communicate with each other. I live in a family that's distributed across thousands of miles. The internet is where we hang out. How do we, as individual organizations, as people, as countries, how do we contribute to maintaining this consensual hallucination that we have? And I think that's where we could take the power of governments to shift requirements on corporations, or where we can take the opportunity to help end users understand, right? The media takes the stance of what gets me the most eyeballs. And so Log4j was blown, from my perspective, wildly out of proportion.
Yeah,
because
it was a big media event.
It made a
as
good
these
media
often
story.
are, but Jamie, that always, whether we're talking about open source or politics or crime or pollution or whatever, that's what the media does, right? And to a certain extent, you can't say, "Oh my God, I can't believe that tiger has stripes," right? Because they're a tiger.
Okay, you got me there.
Right? So, of course they do. They blow it out, and you get this distorted view of it, but it's better than no view at all, right? And I think we need to understand that about the media. Are they sensationalist clickbait? And I'm speaking as a media person, the sensationalist clickbaiting, yes. Driven by numbers and money, yes, guilty. But sometimes shining a light, no matter how distorting that light is on a dark corner, is a light nonetheless. A couple of other things I just wanted to mention. Yeah, paying your dues to the Linux Foundation's great. Everyone should do it. And I'm not belittling the Linux Foundation or the Apache Foundation or any of them. They all do.
Exactly.
It's a golden age of open source, and it's a lot, and they got a lot to do with that.
Yes.
But it's more than paying your money. It's the companies like Ivan that are saying, "Hey, I'm willing to put people on my payroll who are going to maintain open source projects, who are going to contribute to open source projects, who may not be doing exactly what my customer needs on this given job, but I know what they're doing helps that rising tide that lifts all boats, and including my boat."
It shows up in some of the ways where even small contributions become valuable contributions. In what can only be described as an accident, we ended up where an Ivan engineer is now the maintainer of the Log4j packaging for Fedora.
There you go.
That's kind of cool. It's not actually a whole lot of work. I mean, yes, December was kind of awful, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of work.
Except when something hits the fan, and then it is. And then you thank God for those people.
But doing that kind of package maintenance, if we take that and we smear it across the thousands of companies that materially profit from the use of open source software, asking one of your engineers to contribute a couple of hours a month from a bottom line perspective
seems like
is rounding error.
Deal.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think you called it end stage capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants to be the one that raises their hand and says, "Yeah, I'm doing that." But there's another aspect, and you touched on it as well too. But I look at it from a different angle.
Sure.
And I'm not going to get into the whole politics thing unless you really want to. But that is, what's the role of government in this, right? The White House had this whole big open source security summit where they had some really good people. I wasn't invited. I doubt you were invited, but I heard really good things about it. I heard really good stuff about it. They seem to have the right people there.
Yes.
And I heard great things. But is it the government's job to shine that light? Are they a piece of it? Shouldn't be a piece of it? How big a role should they play versus private industry? I'm interested. Go ahead.
Yeah, if you take the broader view, so don't make it U.S. centric or, in my case, Canada centric, or Ivan's case, European centric, but rather look at it from the idea of the common good. It's open source is the technology air we breathe. It's the technology water we drink, right? And if everyone does something positive, then there's a positive outcome. How can governments incentivize positive behavior? Well, we can take the examples from things like clean water and clean air, right? We took the lead out of the gasoline. That helped, right? How can we do that same thing with open source? And a lot of it comes from not fear-mongering around it, which again is kind of contrary to mission for lots of the idea of politics, and we'll just hand wave that over there and leave it. But it's also in helping to understand that message of this is how positive outcomes happen, that if we cooperate, we all succeed as a result. And so whether the direction for that comes from sort of the greater than national governments, the European Union or arguably the United States or the UN or any of those, whether it comes from individual nations saying, we're going to route our IT spend dollars into open source choices rather than closed source choices. And I guess the part of it that I think is super interesting, and definitely something that you and I have experienced, is watching what happens when an organization is incentivized to pivot around that closed source toward open source. And I'll cheerfully sit back and say, based on the experience of the 90s and the uh-ohs, I've got a lot of good reasons to really dislike Microsoft. MS-08 was not a great year for us in security, but they've really twisted around that closed source methodology, closed source mindset into a very open source mindset. I mean, they bought GitHub and people lost their minds, but they've basically left it alone / made it better. And they open source a ton of software, and they produce software that's super supportive of open source and VS Code and other tooling where it's like, oh crap, this is actually good. The Windows subsystem for Linux is brilliant. It gives me the best of both worlds. And we need to help other organizations.
The whole Azure cloud is damn open source friendly.
Yeah, very.
And it's not necessarily Windows centric either.
That's not what you're expecting, right? My expectations.
Look, people who still rail about Microsoft, still have, basically Steve Ballmer
dartboards in their room. I get it. But this ain't Steve Ballmer's company. It's not Bill Gates' company. It's Satya's company. And yeah, Microsoft's no longer the poster child. There are other bad guys,
yes,
there's enough of them. But here's how this whole cycle comes together for me. the white knights working on open source projects, toiling away in the bowels of the Linux Foundation, enabling the Grafanas and the Prometheuses and the Kubernetes, and name all the big open source kind of aircraft carrier kind of projects. Right? Making the world go round. We know they have problems. We know there are soft white underbellies. Then something happens. Shit hits the fan. All of a sudden, media gets involved. The public, wakes up from their Rip Van Winkle snooze and says, "Oh my God, there's gambling going on here. I'm shocked," right? And now all of a sudden they shine this light and it gets a little distorted. But that distorted is what wakes up government to say, "Hey, wait a second, we got a common good. We've got a common good issue here. This is what we're good. This is what we're for." Mm-hmm. And we need to rally around, marshal the forces to make it happen. And hopefully they go back to the Linux foundations and the maintainers and the experts to get their opinion and say, what can we do to help? What should we do? When it works right, Jamie, it's a beautiful thing.
When it doesn't work right,
important. We need them to not make a new thing. We need them to use the tools and the systems that we've developed, because we've grown open source governance ourselves, right? As members of the open source community, like me, you've been a user of this stuff for a long time. We watched this stuff grow. We helped where we could. We at least commented on Slashdot all about it. But open source has governance methodologies and capabilities and capacities. We don't need necessarily a legislative solution to it so much as we need a push for participation.
Yeah. Agreed, man. Agreed. Anyway, hey, man, we're over time, but I love talking about this stuff with you. Are you planning RSA? Are you planning to attend this year, or maybe not?
I am cautiously optimistic that I will be there.
Right. Me too. I hope to see you there if we do. We are going to do a Bloggers Network event. The Jillian's, whatever Jillian's morphed into, that place closed.
Yes.
So we got another place. We'll put it out. But I hope to see you and all our friends who are going there. Absolutely. And we'll raise a glass and have a good time, man. All right.
Stuff. Thanks so much.
All right.
Jamie Arlen here from Ivan on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, we are back. Next up, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast. This is the part 2 of a 2-part conversation that Mike Jones has with Vidya Sekar. She's the senior security service engineer over at Microsoft. And so they have a very, very unique discussion about so many things, including the future of mankind, artificial intelligence, and technology in general, as well as some of the softer things such as friendships and hardships and diversity and so much more. It's a great conversation. And if you didn't check out yet the first part, which ran yesterday, highly encourage you to do that as well. But let's go ahead and run the second part right now.
Are we actually a very, very advanced civilization already? And are we just the characters inside the game that we're actually playing above? Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. So it reminds me of the first video game that I really got into called Sims. And, you know, everybody knows what Sims is. You can create houses and families and people. And I would always create the house and the family and make them destroy each other. You know, just nobody was happy and my civilization broke down. But I do think about that. And I think about, you know, reaching out to outer space and you know, the new telescope that went into space not too long ago and what we're going to find. You
but
know,
it's also just a small component. If you really look at it from this player theory that the player is playing us as the game, then even the multiverse is basically part of the game. And how many copies of us are there? And how many players are playing this game? It's just really fascinating to me to just speculate.
And doppelgangers. Doppelgangers
exactly.
too. Like you can take two people that are not related. And I've seen photos of this on like
it was a copy paste. It was a copy paste and then just changed a couple things. Yeah.
Right. And I've seen like real world glitches. Like there was a video that somebody took of an airplane that literally looked like it was stuck in a lag and it was not moving. And things like that, like that wrinkle in time, you know, I'm actually printing Einstein on my 3D printer right now. But, you know, just relativity and some of the theories that back then they thought were absolutely insane that have been proven. Yes, it's true. And
at least for those that follow science. Yes, I agree.
Yes. But yeah, it's really interesting to look at the potential in the future. And when you look at relationships and how those are going to be formed and maintained. And it's been a really, I guess, focal point for me in the past couple of years because of the pandemic. It took that social interaction out of the equation and made it more virtual. And I think it really tested people's resilience as far as be able to maintain those relationships through a virtual connection. And I think we're geared towards that. Like you say, we have Amazon that can deliver groceries, whatever we want to get at the store.
I've been living.
Yeah.
That's how I've been living. It's all been delivery services. And I always thank them so much for it because I can't get out there to do my own shopping. So, yeah.
I mean,
but I want to go back to the thing about the hacker word. I think when you think about hack, we all do it. We've all got little hacks for everything. And in fact, it reminds me of crows because I have a lot of crows outside my balcony. On the weekends, especially, I see them calling and going by all the time. There's an old Thummel story about a crow that wanted something, but it was at the bottom of this jar that it couldn't get to. And so the crow couldn't figure out how to get to it, but there was water. So it started to put like a bunch of rocks in until it finally rose enough. Oh, it was water. It wanted water, but there wasn't enough. So it threw rocks in. The water rose to that point, then it could finally drink the water. And I was like, that's a hack. That crow was hacking that jar of water. And that's not a bad thing. So it's just, everything we have, we seem to put this good and bad terminology around it, right? So it's just energy. Energy can be good and bad. It's just power. Power can be good or bad. It's just money. Money can be good or bad, right? It's the usage of the thing. It's the intent. It's are they trying to criminally steal from somebody else? Are they trying to kill someone, harm someone? That is the same no matter which platform we're in. Are we on Earth as what we believe to be real creatures, or is it digital, or is it going to be in the metaverse? Like the reality is going to be just kind of trying to deem if that thing that we encountered was really supposed to be done with ill intent or not, right?
Right. Totally agree.
I think the more we get logical about this, I feel like the more likely we'll find alternative solutions to the way that we're doing things. And that's been a real thing for me. I wish that we weren't a security industry, honestly. I wish that because basically security is everyone's responsibility. It's not just a few group of people. It's like the law is not the law enforcement officer's responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility to follow the laws. And then, they're there to help, whenever situations arise or whatever. Some say that they have different experiences with them. I've even had those. That's okay. But the thing is, like, they aren't the only ones responsible for making sure that people are safe in society, just like we shouldn't be the only ones responsible. But for us to do that, we have to get better at communicating how things work, how they need to be protected, how they can harden their systems, how they can defend their homes, they can defend their bank accounts or whatever it is that they need to, how the young children can be kept safe in their multiplayer gaming. Everyone needs to take the burden of that security responsibility on. That's my dream. I want to see everyone get into this industry. I try to get everybody into cybersecurity. It's like, just you're going to we need you. We do. And the person's like, well, I don't do anything. Like, that's okay. Do nothing with us because we'll show you how to do things. It's really, really important because everyone has different ideas and thoughts, right? I came out of Detroit, so my perspective is very street smart, and I look at things in a very different way than someone who had a nice education and kind of came up through the correct method of growing their career. Unlike me, I started in GRC and then I moved backwards into IR, going through all the steps in complete reverse order. That's okay.
I come from the same type of background. I don't have an education. I graduated high school, barely graduated high school, and later on down the road decided to take some college courses, and it was all in science. And I have enough hours to have a bachelor's degree, but it's all in science, so I'm not qualified for anything. But
you do, because the thing that's most important is what you learned, right? If you can use what you learned. Like, I used to complain. I told my mentor this the other day. I was like, when I was young, I used to be like, I'm never going to use math. I'm never going to use this. Why am I learning all of this? I'm never going to use it. I was, in a tween, not even a teen back then when I complained about it. Today, I look at that. I'm like, I went to these classes, right? My social studies teacher, Miss Wyndham, at one point, I found a mistake because she was teaching, and she said that a particular god was a goddess in Hindu tradition. And I was like, no, I can tell you the truth. And after class, she took me aside. She's like, look, you can't just yell at the teacher, because my responsibility is to teach what the community tells me I have to teach. Like, if the school board says, teach from this book, this is what you do. She said, take your book, Harcourt, Brace, Jovanovich, write to them, tell them you found an error, ask them to fix it. This is your job. And I was like, okay. So here I am, a sixth grader writing to a textbook company. But those are the things we learn along the way. I thought that's like a fluke thing. Oh, I'm doing this thing and I'll fix the book and other people will be happy. It won't matter to me. But no, that whole taking interest in trying to be accurate and make corrections and reflect on, clear communications, create clarity. It's one of our principles, right? So create that clarity and be as accurate as possible. That came from Ms. Wyndham at that moment, right? So we pick these things up along the way. It doesn't have to be from a formal education. I still have a lust for formal education. Every few years I sign up to do a master's and then I drop out because of my illness, but then I try again. So I'm trying again right now. I'm going to get started again and hopefully I'll make it this time. We'll see.
That's awesome. Yeah. So Dia, tell me about the culture at Microsoft. One of the things that I did notice when I went to Microsoft was everybody, it's kind of an open campus type feel, and everybody is urged to challenge what's in front of them or what they know to be true. Is it still the same culture? They even had a daycare on campus when I was there. I'm sure they probably still do, but
I think we used to be, when I worked in the California, I worked at Hotmail when I first started at Microsoft in California, and Google was across the street. And one of my friends went over there and came back and was like, they have pregnancy parking. We don't have pregnancy parking. I was like, wow, so yeah, if it was for the perks, that would be interesting. In terms of the culture itself, though, I think yes, because what each of us are trying to do, what we're trying to build, is not the same thing we already have. Because that's just the philosophy of what we're trying to do, is build tomorrow and to enable more people around the world to be able to achieve their dreams using the software and the services that we put out there, and even some of our hardware. So in order to do that, we have to challenge ourselves. I think that the changes that the way in which we challenge one another has shifted. So we do it with respectfulness and empathy now. I think that was a very important thing because it's led to some wonderful collaborations within the company that I think we're really benefiting from now.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, Microsoft gets the short end of the stick when it comes to reputation. I look at some of the products coming out of Microsoft, and they're great products. I think where I've seen the gap is people don't necessarily understand the technology. They don't necessarily follow the right steps to protect it. One of the things as a pen tester that used to drive me crazy is going to a campus or doing a pen test and seeing vulnerabilities in Microsoft networks from like 10 years ago. But it's not Microsoft's fault. They put out patches. It's legit. Problem is people don't know how to advance their networks along with the technology.
So that's a really great gap that you've identified, and that is the ability for people to actually act on the fixes that we're putting out there, right? Mm-hmm. It's challenging. It really is. Like, I think you remember when WannaCry happened, we actually went back and provided updates on platforms that we don't support anymore. And I think it's important in some cases to do that because of the vital situations in which those particular customers were still leveraging old software. But at the same time, we do what other companies do too, right? You've got the same problem with upgrades that need to happen with software that, is not even on Windows, like Linux software. There's so many older versions that people are using for whatever reason. I mean, we have that problem. It's a fundamental hygiene problem. And it's sort of something that I used to make my soapbox when I was in TVM. I used to always talk about, you guys need to patch this stuff. Now I'm looking at it and I'm wondering, so the root cause of some of that was that there were flaws in the software that was produced and delivered. And so how do those flaws get prevented from being introduced, right? But there's only so much you can do there also. So the kind of root cause thinking that I have that kind of drives me, it's kind of making me, and this is actually why I've talked to different universities to try to figure out where I should go next in terms of learning, because it's how do we come up with that picture of that root cause that we can actually address that will really have that ripple effect and make us stop playing this whack-a-mole game? We've built entire processes and we've built entire, we've built an entire industry around just patching, if you think about it, right? Is there a better way? We don't know right now because we've tried doing things on behalf of the customer. They don't want that. They want the control. Vista is a great example where we put so many things in place and it didn't work for the user. The user wants their freedom. But then how do you defend their systems while they want their freedom as well, which is an interesting thing. And in fact, my role right now, I'm in IR and I work for an organization that does manage desktops for enterprises. So it's Microsoft Managed Desktop. I actually love this role. I get to talk to our external customers. Sometimes I get to help them with different issues that are coming up. We have a SOC team. We're also building out our blue team really nicely. It's just super fun to do this because this is that partnership that fills that gap. So they could go with a third party to manage those desktops, right? Or they could manage them themselves. But then if they need this and that from Microsoft, then they need that third party to come and find Microsoft and whatever. In this case, they're just talking to us. We'll go talk to our friends and figure it out and come back and help them, which I think it has its charm to it. It's a little bit more cost effective for those folks, I think, in the long run. I hope it is.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's really cool to think of Microsoft as having a SOC and a blue team and the things that everybody else has in the industry. But I think where the industry fails, like you said, it's a battle of patching. But I look at it a little bit differently. So I look at the mistakes left in code as an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's an opportunity to find those little hidden gems, exploit them. And when the patch comes out, guess what? That software package or that technology has just gone through a micro innovation stage. And every time that happens, we all learn lessons, but it also advances the technology as well.
It does.
Without those flaws, I don't think that we would be where we're at in technology, to be honest with you.
I think you're right. It's interesting. Lance Spitzner from SANS, he teaches, I think, security awareness, and he put out a really cool chart at one point that I've seen, and I love it. It actually looks at the Windows OS, and it looks at all the different things we've put in place since, I think, 2005 or something. And it's just a chart that shows how much harder and harder it is to actually pop the system, which I love, because we've put a lot of really cool new techniques in place to defend the system for the customer. And I think that matters. We need to look at doing more of that. But there's always going to be the freedom to do what you want to on these systems. And today it's fine. It's just a laptop. It's just a server. What's it going to be when it's inside your body?
Right. That's my biggest fear.
When it's, in your transportation, your only mode of transportation, you're inside with 100 other people in this new mode of transportation, and it's going at, unheard of speeds today, because we now have cooler transportation 100 years or 10 years from now, even. What's it going to be then? Like, how much will we tolerate having a company go ahead and fix things for us before something bad happens, right?
I think that at that point, you talk about freedom, security, and having control. And I think that when it gets to the point where it's that critical, I think some of those freedoms and controls will probably be taken away, to be honest with you. I think that those systems will
react. I mean, just look at the pandemic as an example. How are people going to react to being told you don't have this freedom anymore? It doesn't go over well.
No, it doesn't. But I think it takes that painful situation to be able to revolutionize the way that we do things. I mean, look at the way the U.S. was founded and formed. That was a lot of pain and struggle, and a lot of good things came out of it. But sometimes I feel like in order to grow as a person, I have to go through that pain or that struggle in order to get to the other side and go, hey, you know what? I did it this way. It worked this way. And this is the lessons I learned along the way. And I think as a civilization, we need to stop looking at the environment that we live in as a state or as a community or as a micro-segmented piece of reality. We all are one, really, and what we do affects everybody. And I think that when we get to that mentality where we can embrace that, I think things will change drastically without that much struggle and pain.
It's true, but we also have to take into account that everything is not one size fits all.
Right.
And there are underrepresented communities in technology.
Oh, absolutely.
Until their voices are part of our solution, we're not solving for everyone. The distance between the haves and the have-nots, once the metaverse is really where we start to live and work, that's going to grow bigger than we've ever realized, unless, and this was another part of the conversation I had with another friend, is like, what if how are we going to project people that, for example, are homeless or poverty stricken? Are we going to project them into the metaverse because that's just where all humans are going to be? Or is there going to be an outside world and an inside world? What's going to happen? And so part of how those decisions get made and making sure that everyone's voice, like enough people from the communities that are not widely represented, enough of those voices are part of the conversation. There's enough dissent. And dissent doesn't mean just get angry and walk away. It means have the conversations, understand with empathy why somebody thinks the opposite of you.
Right.
And absorb that, internalize it, understand, live in their shoes for a minute and see what that feels like. And then start to think about how do you construct around that? Because we're building a community, we're building a neighborhood or a new world, right? And then we are also going to have to abstract away from things we're used to. We're used to countries, we're used to languages, we're used to differences. that's going to be hard too, because I don't think humans want to be the same. I think they want to be different. We see it because even in America, we've self-segregated into communities by ethnicity in a lot of places, right? So I think people want to have those cultural differences, which is great. So how do we account for that in our planning? And so, and I'm not at all assuming that I'm one of the planners, but I'm saying that, these are whatever those decisions are that get made, the trickle down effect is going to be, how do we protect all these people, all the people, not just the ones that fit the terms of that decision and what that future looks like. So
right, and I've talked to a lot of groups and a lot of individuals who are spearheading that change, which is fantastic. Black Girls Hack is a great group that I love that group. They support a lot of the diversity and really support people in the community, and Blacks in Cyber. The work that they do. You probably see me reposting all their posts. I just think it's amazing what they do for them.
I love what Vic does. They're fantastic. I think I definitely want to get more involved in helping them. I just, mentoring is probably the one most important thing that if you're in cybersecurity, no matter what level, no matter what it is your job is, everyone needs to be mentoring. We all need to be bringing more people in. We need to be getting more of those diverse folks into our environment. We need to build this world out the way it's supposed to look. Otherwise, all our data science, all our AI, it's all going to be very, very one-sided, even gender perspective, right?
Oh, yeah.
We're still not even at 50%. We're not even at 30% yet. And so it's a real passion of mine that we bring more people in. In fact, on my team, we have a small group of us that are focused on kind of changing those job descriptions so we can describe things in a more attractive way. And so people don't self-select out of a possible role because they're like, well, I don't have those skills, right? How do we write the job descriptions in a more attractive way? How do we have mixers and, events that help expose what are the things that we do so that people who are interested can come and get to talk to us and learn about those things and say, you know what, I'm going to throw my hat in. I'm going to try this. We need to make those gates a little more open than they are right now. And we need to, we're going to be exacting. We're going to be accurate. We're going to do what we need to do. Anyone can learn all of that. But that passion, that interest, that desire to do it, that's the one thing we need to be very good at identifying in a person and then get everything out of the way so that person can be brought in.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. And sitting here thinking about, the diversity and metaverse and are we going to exclude certain types of people or certain, segments of the population? It reminds me of a funny movie I watched recently with Ryan Reynolds. I can't remember the name of it, but he was basically playing a character in a game. And they had different people. And at the end of the game, they just got tired of the bullshit and they revolted. And it was really quite cool to watch that kind of simulation game. You'll have to watch it. I can't remember the name of it.
You need to start posting your movies. You need to start posting a list of movies, Mike.
I know. I do watch a lot of film. I actually just recently started with Alyssa Knight writing screenplays for her short films.
Oh, awesome.
Which I love
her. I love her.
She's
Capital
awesome.
L. She's amazing.
Yeah, I had her on the podcast last year and we hit it off and I started working with her and it's been an amazing ride so far. I'm doing things that is completely out of my comfort zone. I'm not a writer. I'm not by any means creative in that way, but now I'm starting to learn that maybe that's a hidden skill that I didn't know I had. But I try to learn something every day and step outside my comfort zone and experience new things. And I think that's really important in the industry because it's really easy to get locked into a job or a type of job in cybersecurity and never get out of it. I think that it's important to learn all aspects. Like I did red team before I did blue team, and now I'm running an MDR. So it diversity in the workplace with people, as well as diversity with the types of jobs you take. Yeah,
experiences, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, going from PM to engineering is a change. Going from I did that and I didn't think I'd ever do it, but I was so excited when I finally made that switch. And then going from, even in PM, working in an organization that just does email Hotmail, and then going into looking at all the online services and what do they need to do before release to keep, their users protected. There's that. And then going from that into anti-malware, working for Defender team, right? And going from that to threat and vulnerability management. Of course, I left the company in between for a second, which was super fun, but also not my thing. I need to come back. Sometimes you just need to have these other experiences because, you don't know light if you don't know dark. You don't know. The characteristic of something if you don't know the opposite of it. In a sense, you kind of need to have the yin and the yang.
Yeah.
And at any given time, you'll find that I'm learning something I totally don't know. Like right now, I'm really struggling with Sanskrit letters because I never knew how to read it. I understand it quite well, but I never knew how to read it. And for some reason, it's just something appealing to me. And while I'm doing that, I'm like, well, how does that relate to Latin? So that's being brushed up at the same time, which is interesting. During the pandemic, I wanted to practice something. So I picked ukulele. That seemed easy enough for someone with arthritis. So I've been doing songs. I've been doing ukulele quite well. It's been really fun. And I can now do a whole bunch of really cool songs and things now. So, it's about just constantly being entertained by yourself.
Yeah.
Because the more you know and the more you understand, then when you're put in a situation where all of a sudden you're on this team and this team does something you've never done before and you have to secure their releases, it becomes there's less ramp time because you can kind of grok it and go, oh, this reminds me of this reminds me of that. I mean, that's really the best way to kind of transition into cybersecurity, right? Is to be able to ask a lot of questions and then see what people are doing and go, this sounds like that. This sounds like that. Do that pattern matching.
Yep.
And if you can pattern match and help people see what you know in the context of what they're looking for, that's the route in. And the thing is, if you never stop trying to know more things, then you connect with way more people, and that leads to way more collaboration, way more understanding and empathy, and ultimately it helps us keep people secure more.
Absolutely. And I like to say the more you know, the more you grow.
Yes.
So I try to stick to that. So last thought before we close it down, someone coming into the industry, what would be your key piece of advice for anybody coming in?
I would say to really just become a sponge and absorb everything. Try to understand what the big picture looks like. If you're going to be in security, try to understand what all the different domains are. What are all the different roles? How do they relate to the different domains? And try to see what you like. And that's, I think, what a lot of people don't do. They don't think about what they like to do. They think about, I need to learn this so I can get into DFIR so I can do this, right? Instead of that, think about what are you naturally drawn to, what you naturally really like to do. And you'll find there's something in security, something in cybersecurity, InfoSec, whatever we call it these days. You'll find there's something in there that's actually aligned with what you enjoy. And it's going to be a perfect fit for you. Then you build that space as kind of your niche. But at the same time, while you're building that niche, learn other things, try other jobs. I remember once when I was a PM, a manager said to me, because I was complaining about ops, they were like, why don't you go work in ops? So I was like, okay. So I flipped roles and I worked in ops, and I was like, then complaining about dev. And I was like, okay, I get it now. So if you don't do the other job, you won't know what, why they do what they do. And I think asking why is super helpful. Ask why things are the way they are before you just do them, and ask, how long they've been this way, because we'll find things, even protocols are super old. Why are they still there, right? Why have we not updated them? Why are these gaps that we've had for so long not been looked at? And so it's sort of like you're joining a cleaning crew and you're going in a house that really, really needs a deep clean. That's really what security is. So you're going to find things around the corner, get the duster ready and get going,
That's
I
awesome.
think that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, I like that analogy, definitely, and it ties in with. I kept thinking Bluetooth stack. It's been like 30 years and it's still the same. Dia, it was great having you on. Thanks for taking the invite and jumping on here. I knew we'd have a great conversation. I can look at people's LinkedIn and kind of gauge how we'll fit together. And looking at your resume and the things you put out there, it's definitely positive and challenging. And it definitely was a great conversation. So come back anytime. And I hope you do well, and I hope you stay safe and healthy. And thank you.
You as well, Mike. Thanks.
Absolutely. All right. Talk to you guys soon.
CISO Talk. To hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, we're back. Next up, we've got CISO Talk. This is the ongoing series here on Techstrong TV. In this episode, Mitch Ashley, who's the host, speaks with Anthony Johnson from DelveRisk, Mike Rothman at Securosis, talking about the changing role of CISOs, including how they balance business and security needs and how they are bridging that communication gap that has always existed between the executive team and the IT team. Great conversation with a lot of insights. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of CISO Talk. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm CTO with Techstrong Group and also principal with Techstrong Research. My partner in crime, Matt Newfield, is off today. I think he got a call on the bat phone that he had to take, so he is otherwise occupied. So let's get to our topic today. I think it's a great time to be talking about it because we're all living it in so many ways. And the topic is how the changing role of the CISO. I mean, a lot of jobs have changed in recent history, but I can't think of any that's changing more than a CISO's job. Well, let me first introduce our esteemed panel of guests, repeat guests. Glad to have you both back. Appearing again in, let's see, what position are you playing? You playing center or guard this game here, Mike Rothman with security. I can't talk.
Goalie. The fat guy's always the goalie, so that's me.
You just like all the equipment. That's why you like goalie.
I like the big gloves.
Introduce yourself for the people that might not know you.
Anthony, nice to see you guys. I'm Mike Rothman. I'm president of Securosis, a security-centric research firm, and I've been doing this for way longer than I care to admit. But this is actually a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I'll start telling stories and stuff. But it's really nice to see everybody coming around about, 10 years after I started, kind of making this pitch. So this will be a great conversation.
Very cool. We're trying to catch up.
Anthony Johnson with DelveRisk. Great to be talking with you. Introduce yourself, Anthony.
Anthony Johnson, so managing partner, founder at DelveRisk. We're a market research organization. Formerly, I was a CISO at a number of organizations like JP Morgan, Fannie Mae, GE, et cetera. But love being in the community and just kind of engaging in these things. And I'm pumped about the chat today.
Thanks, both of you. It's always great to be talking with you, whether on camera or not. So, there's so many avenues we could go down here and so many dimensions of how just security in general has changed as a job and as part of the organization. I guess maybe to start it out with, it seems to me one of the biggest is that everything involves security because everything is digital. I mean, we've gone all digital for all experiences. We still do in-person things, but as we've moved everything to a digital experience user, whether it's partners or customers or employees or whatever it is. So suddenly, everything is about security, and now it's a boardroom discussion, not just in the back room of the network organization, like maybe when you and I started, Mike, way back.
Anthony's a young guy, so he
I just look. I mean, I got the gray, so I just look young. I just got good skin.
You got to understand, you're with like some two certifiable old guys here. So
well, you just figured out the technique. When Mike or I don't know the answer, we just kind of give the old beard chin stroke. So the old guy stuff.
Love it.
Jump in, Anthony. So talking about how things have changed for the CISO and what's driving it.
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting is that when you look at where a lot of the security leaders started in their career, they started off in the back server, managing infrastructure kit. And it was, hey, we're going to deliver the goods. We're going to make this thing work. Even if they weren't involved in the developer side, right? They were trying to make things run. But nobody actually told us that in 20, 30 years, this is going to be the most important function to make the world operate, right? Like, I think we would have kind of all laughed and like, oh, the internet's a cool thing, but like, is it really going to be the most groundbreaking technological innovation ever, right? Because that's a huge, huge statement. And then to say, and you person are responsible to protect that. That's actually really terrifying. And so I think you found security leaders who went from being this geek to making things work to now saying, okay, now I got to protect and connect the entire lifeblood of my company, my community, my nation. And it's a big set of shoes to fill. And it's been constantly changing.
It sure is. And I guess I would put this into the category of things that we needed to be careful about when we wished for them, right? Because again, all being, kind of experienced guys doing this for 20, 25 years at this point, there was a time, and I know it's hard for everybody to remember, but there was a time when, people would be like, security, what's that? Right. And why am I paying for that again? And what is this, little token I have to use to get into my remote access gear and all of those things from the old days. And we would constantly be whinging when we would, get together and drink some beers, maybe a lot of beers, maybe even stuff harder than that on that front to kind of ease our pain because nobody cared. Right. And we couldn't get any funding. And it was very difficult to do the job because it was marginal. We were marginalized from that perspective. And what we have now is not that problem, right? What we have now is possibly overexposure, but really, and I think where we need to get to in the discussion and really in the skill set, and Anthony, that's an important point that you made, that a lot of kind of the CISOs that initially took that role ended up looking like technical people that drew the short straw, right? They were either around for too long, they didn't figure out how to say no, or they didn't realize what a crap job it was going to be, but they ceased to be technical people at that point, and they didn't realize they were playing a different game. Right. And that's kind of the thing. And, the thing I dangled out there like before, right. I've been talking about this for 10 years is I actually wrote a book called The Pragmatic Cso in 2007. And one of the things that I talked about there was the fact that you're not a security professional, you're a financial professional, right? You were JP Morgan, right? So financial professional that happens to do security. And what I was trying to get across there is that it's about the business and you're playing a different game. And if you don't understand that it's about either enabling or managing risk on the part of the business, again, you're just a keyboard jockey, right? And there's really no role for that at the senior level.
I think what's also really, something to think back on, like we can kind of look back and kind of chuckle about it. But if you remember the I love you worm, right? Mm-hmm. Like back then when it hit, it was like, oh man, this sucks. But I remember conversations with people being like, if they wanted to be malicious, this could have really sucked. Like this could have been really bad. And now, could you imagine the if something like that were to truly proliferate, it would be rampant destruction just across the world, and things that we look at like, well, thank God the hackers weren't mean. Well, they're mean now, right? Like they're keen to make money, and we are trying to figure out how we operate in this world where in one jurisdiction this is totally illegal, and another jurisdiction the government quasi condones it because they're hitting U.S. companies
or maybe funding it,
right? Or even funding it, and we know they're agents moonlighting. So it's a totally different game from where we've gone from 20 years ago to, let me see if this works, to, all right, I think I can make about $700 billion this year, whatever it is, right?
Well, things have changed when we look fondly back at the I Love You virus and the code red. My, how things have changed when our email server being overloaded was the issue. Yeah, both of you have hit, nailed it on the head, the issue of the CISO has to think and talk business, not just technical jargon, right? It's not just protocols and firewalls and all, blocking and all that good kind of stuff. But it really is a role where you're at the center point of both what do we need to do and how much do we need to do of it? And also, what do we do when something happens? Because it will happen. And, bad things happen to good CISOs, right? It happens. So I'm curious, Anthony, from your perspective, you've lived this in that transition from the technical world to now you got to deal with, as a business person. What's the biggest gap that you saw in your own experience that you had to quickly look for mentors or other ways to kind of fill?
Yeah, so it's interesting, going to found an organization and software company. I quickly aligned to the whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and really all of a sudden in the business context, revenue is food, right? And security is great, but if you're starving, it's a nice to have. And I've caught in flack for saying this in the past, but like there are things that you kind of go up like there are first world problems. I don't want to say security is a first world problem, but like there's a lot of other problems that businesses will suffer if they fail to drive revenue, customer retention, et cetera. And security is going to be the last thing on the mind of the board when they can't make payroll. Right. Mm-hmm. But the security leader needs to know how they influence and impact that food collection, that revenue collection. What can they do to add value to it? Or what are they doing that actually slows that down? Because you constrict the processes too much, and all of a sudden you have security choking a business. And that's where I think you see a lot of security leaders running into, loggerheads with, their leadership teams in a lot of cases.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about empowerment, because I think that's actually a very critical aspect to being successful as a senior security professional moving forward. And the first epiphany to understand is that you're not empowered to do anything, right? The fact is, that's probably not exactly true, but you're not empowered to do a lot, right? So a big part of the evolution from technical professional to manager/leader is a general concept. Let's just call it persuasion, right? Because when you're not empowered to do anything, you have to be really good at persuading other senior folks in the organization to get things done. And by the way, in the old days, CISOs had empires, right? They had security operations. I guess I probably shouldn't say the old days, right? Because some folks still have security operations for, on-prem things, and they've got groups of responders and all that. So you do have some people, but ultimately you're going to say, we've got to make changes in these systems. And the folks that run the systems are going to go, get the hell out of here, right? And that's being nice. And we talked about the attackers not being nice. When you start to tell some, business leader that you've got to take some of their stuff offline because of, a potential risk, man, they're going to be probably a little bit less nice, right? Yeah. And it's even compounding from that standpoint, because as we continue to move towards DevOps, right, and we continue to distribute our data all over the place, it is those folks. I mean, we can joke and say, "Ooh, DevSecOps," and that's a load of crap. Right? Because you've got the developers, you got the ops folks, the security folks, maybe at the front end of the process can have a say. Maybe if, kind of the brown stuff hits the fan, they get involved from that standpoint. But for the most part, not so much. Right? So what we have to do to evolve as leaders, right, as security leaders, is to really start to understand how are we going to persuade these folks to do the right thing from a security perspective, while continuing to achieve what they have to on the business, which again leads back to the second point, which is if you don't understand your business, it's really hard to persuade somebody why being secure is in the best interest of their business, right? So it gets back to this idea that you have to be a professional in your business that happens to practice security. You have to be very effective from a persuasion standpoint because these folks don't want to do what's in their best interest from a security perspective. And we're not empowered to do anything until we are. And when we are, that is a very bad day. Right. That means something has gotten out of the cage. Right. Some bad stuff is happening. And now we're trying to figure out, kind of what is where. And typically Eastern Europe or South America is, kind of the answer to that question, which again, very, very bad days.
So Mike, let me challenge you on that. I know, Anthony, you're going to jump in, so I'll let you jump in a minute too. I want to challenge you on that from this aspect. One of the things that actually works in our favor, ironically, is every business executive knows or at least heard of ransomware, and they know they don't want to have that, right? And the board is now looking at the CISO to say, we're okay, right? Do you need more? And not giving you unlimited budget, but I don't want you coming back and say, well, if I would have just spent this extra, we would have had that ransomware. My point being, it is coming to us as in, I don't want to have this problem. Yeah. You need to do what you need to do. I'm not saying you're wrong, you're right. But that's changed. So that advocacy, it doesn't have to be FUD anymore. It can be, okay, then this is the right thing to do.
Mitch, but what I found is that talk is cheap. And when you sit with any senior executive, board member, CIO, security. And then when it comes time to actually make the fundamental changes that are required to truly be secure, a little bit less interest on that front, right? So if I can write a check and make the problem go away, that's great. If I, hey, what does that check need to be, right? But our problem isn't funding anymore. Right? Our problem is skills, but ultimately our problem is change and transformation because doing security consistently, right? Having an organization that is security aware is hard, right? It's hard.
I think I'd like to throw out this piece here, right? Like most security leaders, I think, struggle with being able to articulate how an EDR gets the business from 10% wallet share to 12% wallet share, right? Most security leaders, actually, if you ask them like, hey, how does your company make money? I remember having this conversation with a CISO last year who's in financial services. I was like, hey, coaching this guy, I'm like, how does your bank make money? And he's like, oh, deposits. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he actually didn't know where or how the bank made money. And when you are talking to somebody as a business leader, right, who's been doing this for 20, 30 years, and someone's like, hey, you got to do this. It's going to be really, really important, and it's going to save us a big risk. And I'm like, okay, how? When they're BSing and don't know what they're actually trying to advocate for. And so those security leaders who actually meaningfully understand the business, not just we take deposits, but we actually make money by doing custody. We make money by doing this. There's all these aspects, and you have a different risk posture for different lines of or subsegments of the business. Then you're going to be able to have a more meaningful conversation with those business leaders. Be like, man, you get it. Okay, what do I actually need to do to make sure that custody and asset management is going to be good? Because that's very, very different from what we're going to do on the consumer side here. And so going back to Mike's point, right? It's about understanding the business, but really understanding the business. It's the difference between having kids and raising kids, I think, right? Like you can have kids, but it's different to raise them, and you have to be able to raise them and invest in that business that way.
And once you know that, Anthony, now you can say, now you know what's at risk, right? We need to protect this revenue because it's, whatever percentage of our business is the high growth area, it's the whatever. By the way, those are all things on your annual report and umpteen financial disclosures as well as internal documents. So it's not like it isn't available. But knowing that now gives you a connection to the business to say, okay, this is why what we were protecting. It's not just the deposits, the things in the safe. Banks that other than deposit box don't operate that way. But literally knowing that, now you can have at least start of a credible discussion.
It is. Now, I do think that there's a bit of a gotcha that we've painted ourselves in as industry professionals.
Okay.
And here's what the gotcha was, is that 20, 30 years ago, we actually had to prove or demonstrate that we were experts at everything before anybody took our credibility seriously. So, we said, we're going to do all these talks, we're going to talk about all these things. And so a lot of tech or security leaders back then were actually afraid to ask questions about the business because they would come across as like, well, you don't know what you're talking about, your credibility's gone. You fast forward and we continue to exacerbate that behavior of people being like, I'm an expert at tech, you do the business, and I'm going to separate it. And that's not the way that we can actually survive as an industry anymore.
That's right. Because everything is tech aware at this point. So Mitch, I want to capitalize on a little bit or highlight a little bit of the thing that you alluded to, but didn't necessarily say it specifically. And that's this idea. That's this idea of credibility, right? And it really is built based upon doing what you say you're going to do in a way that folks understand. So, and again, just being general technical people, we tend not to want to get into sales. We tend not to want to do marketing. And again, when you get to this point, you're on CISO talk, right? So this is a CISO level type thing. You are having to sell your agenda, right? You have to market your achievements from the standpoint of saying, this is what I accomplished for the business this year. Maybe it is into getting in the way of ransomware. Maybe it is responding to something before you had a big problem. Maybe it's, kind of keeping systems up and running under constant attack, whatever it is, right? It's nice to talk about it around the dinner table and say, wow, look what a great person I am, but that doesn't help you in the boardroom. Right. So you have to start, kind of building up, but capitalizing and taking advantage of that credibility, because as you guys like to say, right, kind of good thing or bad things happen to good CISOs, right? You're going to need that credibility, right? You're going to need to have made deposits in the credibility bank, because at some point you're going to outstay, something's going to go south, right? And what you don't want is it to be deemed that you've outstayed your welcome. And then you're welcome to go find another job at that point.
You're welcome very much.
Well, let me just add this one last piece there, right? Like, it's almost like I always call it like the curse of the brilliant, right? I talk to most of our customers are software service companies trying to sell to enterprise, right? And so I talk to some really, really great founders of some really cool technology companies. And a lot of them are like, yeah, but once they see it, they'll figure it out and then they'll understand it. Then they'll get the value of why they got to buy it. I'm like, no, you actually have to like simplify this down. You have to sell this, right? And so a lot of times really smart people, smart technologists, they assume that other people are equally as smart and be like, oh, but once I show you the protocol, you'll totally get it. And then we're just off the races, it's just time to check. And you're like, that's not really how this works, right?
But you have to do that without, talking down or belittling or making people feel,
That's right.
Nobody, especially in the boardroom, likes to feel like they're dumb. So you have to communicate simply and clearly, but not condescending, or at least people think
and that's a skill. That is a definite skill, right?
Well, it sure is. And let's talk a little bit about unicorns. Right? Because what we're talking here is, and Anthony, to your point about having to, in order to feel like you contribute and feel, you have to know everything about everything, right? And in today's technical world, I mean, that it's hard for me to know anything about anything, right? And this is what I do for a living.
Yeah, right? I think Gartner came out with like 2 new quadrants yesterday or something like that.
Yeah, well, whatever it is. I mean, it's very difficult to stay on top of all of these things. And it's also very difficult to understand and be so business centric and understand exactly the knobs of the business and all that. And you know what? It's okay to partner. Right. It's okay. Whether you're the top or they're the top or whatever it is, you tend to, in some cases, sometimes you can find a unicorn, right? And maybe you become that unicorn where you're able to transition from really understanding the technology to really understanding the business. And that's fantastic, right? Those are the folks that make, high 6 and 7 figure deals now, because, they don't come along very often. In a lot of other cases, you got to partner up, right? So if you come from a technical background, you have to be able to find somebody that I call Mr. or Ms. Fix-It, right? And they're the folks that understand how to get things done in the organization. They have the relationships. They've been there for, many years. And they know in a lot of cases where the proverbial bodies are buried, right? From the standpoint of being able to get things done in the organization. And in a lot of cases, especially if the security team is broken after a big issue or something's just not working, they'll fix it in to actually run the team. And I'll tell you what, they don't know anything about security. They hardly know anything about technology, but they're really good in the organization and they're fantastic business people. So they're going to be able to find and partner with those technical experts very quickly, because that's what they do. Whether they get airlifted into some far off land, if you've got a factory that's kind of on the rocks, you got a broken security program, this person comes in, finds the people, builds the program, moves forward, goes on to the next assignment from that standpoint. And that's okay, right? A lot of technical people get very threatened when business folks come in and start talking business stuff. And, oh my God, you don't know anything. It's like, hey, get over yourself, folks. Get over yourself, right? Because if you can't get things done in the business, you can't be successful.
I want to swing the conversation in another direction. I think something that's also changed for us is it's not about being secure. It's implementing security that can be adopted and implemented. I mean, so Matt Newfield, who's CISO with Unisys, my co-host, he always talks about, you have to think about what is it going to take for people to be able to do what you're asking them to do, or make it transparent so it's less for them to do. But that's true whether it's a digital experience for a customer or you're asking employees to use two-factor or something else now that they haven't used before, whatever it might be. But there's a human element of it. We have kind of customers of our own, consumers of security, that we have to think in that mindset too. I think that's a new thought versus, hey, it's tough. We just prescribe this as the policy and you got to follow it.
Yeah, I think that the thing there is that, in security, we're like, oh, if you do X, Y, Z, and then you dance 1, 2, 3 steps and then backwards, we're like, okay, we almost think we're giving them technology and solutions that they're going to follow, even though it's really long. But at the end of the day, people who are working in the company, other parts of the company, even in your security team, they take the path of least resistance. They're like, hey,
totally,
I see this is here, but I can get my job done. And that's what I'm being measured on. And if I just go directly this path instead, so I'm just going to do this. And you have security leaders who are like, well, how come you didn't do this? I was much more sick. It's like, because you created something that was so painful, I'm now going to find another way to do it, right? And if you take away all my options, we're really creative. We'll find even more creative, crazy ways to circumvent those things. And it's not because users are trying to circumvent security. Users are just trying to achieve that outcome. Whatever it is that their job, role, mission, whatever it is they're trying to get to. And security leaders often think well, they're just dumb users. No, they're pretty savvy. There's a ton of developers that work in financial services or in the finance teams and the accounting teams. You're seeing more and more, recent college grads that actually have more scripting capabilities than tech teams. And if somebody doesn't think, for example, that Excel is a crazy powerful application, you've not actually seen a large organization, because there's so much stuff that we try to security controls we try to apply, but you'll have somebody be like, you know what? I don't need to do that database. I can just bang this out in Excel and then I'll just share this over. And then all of a sudden, 3 months later, the business is running on this end user compute thing. And security is scratching its head of why did we lose visibility and no one's using the database anymore? Well,
it is a low code app. It's a low code platform, right?
It is, right? And so I think that's an important piece. One thing I did want to really couch on, Mike, you made a really, really great point of security leaders almost comparing themselves to security teams comparing themselves to larger scale programs. It's almost as if we're comparing ourselves so often against the Michael Jordans. We're like, hey, and business leaders are like, hey, we need a security leader for our local team, our local business. But all I see in the media are the Michael Jordans who are just completely amazing, don't have a flaw. And that's what I'm expecting from, and you have to know that you're going to have to, if you're a business leader, you're going to have to coach them. And as a security leader or tech leader, you're going to have to be coached and be open to it. It's the only way to be successful, unless you're Jordan. right? Then rock on. But like
so many different threads to pull on that one, Anthony. It's hard to kind of know, should I go this way, should I go that way? So the first thing I want to talk about, and again, when you spend a lot of your time with business people as opposed to, kind of hardcore security professionals, which I've kind of gotten to a point in my career where that's what I'm doing, right? You start to learn a lot more about incentives. And I think that's what you were, really talking about, both Mitch and Anthony, about, kind of the fact that you can't make it too hard for folks because they're not incented to do things in a secure way. They're incented to sell more. They're incented to deliver code. They're incented to, reduce customer support calls, whatever it is. Do things securely is probably not at the top of their MBOs, right? And that's what they get paid on. So you always default back to one of the most true statements I've ever heard, right? Which is, if you don't look out for number one, you step in number two. Right. And that's actually a critical concept, is that these folks are going to act in their best interests at all times. So again, all wrapping back to the same place. If you don't understand what their best interests are, how are you going to persuade them to do these things? Right. If you don't understand about the role of incentives and using proper incentives to get the behavior that you need, you really have no shot to do this job anymore. Right. Yeah. So again, a lot of it just gets back to, it's not brain surgery anymore. It's not even Einsteinian knowledge to in terms of how security works. It's a lot more common sense, right? It's a lot more business savvy, right? It's persuasion. It's a lot of these softer skills that a lot of folks go and say, not interested. And that's okay. Just understand you're probably not going to be a very good CISO if you haven't, spent a lot of time thinking about a lot of these softer skills and how you can and get that done. And that brings it around to another, pretty important topic that Anthony, you were just talking about. And I'll call it the general management of expectations. Right? If you can't come into an organization and manage expectations, hey, I'm not Jordan, you're not funding me to be Jordan. We don't need to be Jordan, exactly. Right? Because of the attack surface that we're dealing with, because of the adversaries that we're facing, because of the type of data that we hold. You know what? Good enough is probably good enough, right? And this is what we're willing to invest. And by the way, if you want to invest, at 2x, this is what we can do, right? If we want to invest at 0.5x, this is what may happen, right? So you have to get good at managing those scenarios, communicating those scenarios, and understanding that at the end of the day, it may make more sense for the business to invest in a new factory. Do we still make factories anymore, or whatever it is, or invest in a new system, or whatever the analogy is?
Building chip fabs now.
Yeah. Building a fab, right? Then it is to, kind of update and roll out a new IAM platform. And you know what? That's okay. But you have to be able to communicate, well, if we don't do that, these are the risks, right? And then you make a business decision.
Yep.
It really, it doesn't get a lot more complicated than that. And folks get so bent out of shape. I kind tell you how many people call and just bitch at me about, I couldn't get the funding for this. I couldn't get, well, guess what? Your business is struggling and you got to focus on, kind of rebuilding, the front end of this thing, or else you don't get to play anymore. Right. So a lot of that stuff is luxury. And Anthony, you were talking about that before.
Yeah. I would say one additional point on that, right, is like, and if you look at where we're at now, just as a kind of a society with people having their quite literal pick of the litter of roles and jobs, if a security leader makes the life of the development pipeline too hard, you're going to have developers who are like, hey, I can actually make more money on a platform kit code base process that I understand. It's smoother, less friction. I'm not getting beat up. Someone's not yelling at me every day. So like we have it's this ecosystem now of where you're gonna have business leaders saying, hey, security, you've made this so painful. We've lost top developers. Mm-hmm. That's a whole different ballgame here, right?
Lost sight of what's important. Right.
It is like, and you have to strike that balance, because we're not just protecting the corporate assets. Now we're protecting the corporate mission. We're protecting the revenue streams, employee satisfaction, how they work. If you look at most end of the year employee sat surveys, they include questions like, Do you think that the technology you use enables you to do your business, do your work more effective? And every time there's a no, that tech team needs to really, really think about like, okay, why is that? What are we doing? Are we adding too much friction? Maybe it's enough friction, but once it gets into the too much, like it's a rough world here.
Well, you
bet. And
both brought up a really great topic, which is something that's in our world now, is the world of software and creating software. We don't just get to build hard exteriors for soft interiors, right? Kind of protecting things from the outside. How much do CISOs have to think about? Mike, you mentioned DevSecOps, but think about the whole software that we're building, and is it secure? Are they just going to rely on the software teams to do that? How do we look at it? How do we create a strategy where we're not going to be blindsided because, something got in there, somebody wrote some vulnerable code, whatever it is?
Yeah, I think it's the general acknowledgement that every company is a tech company. Every company has, once you get to a certain size, right? Once you get to a certain size, you've got software, you've got developers that are dealing with that software. And part of the purview of a CISO is going to be that, in effect, product security operational aspect. So you have to get good at assessing risk, right? Because it makes sense, I'm going to use a number of different components, right? That's this whole idea of microservices, is the idea that I can compose these applications using open source libraries, using PaaS services, using a variety of different components, cloud native capabilities that make it easier and faster to build, develop, deploy a lot of these applications. And that means my risk is no longer just the stuff that happens within my world that I control, right? My risk actually is very much extended to all of these different places. And that's why you get companies like Sneak that are just killing it right now, because they help you understand, for all these components that you're using, what are the vulnerabilities, what are the risks, kind of what it is that I have to address. And again, so what we're really talking about here, to kind of wrap it back around, Mitch, is that it used to be fairly discreet in terms of what this job was, right? It was very much keep the bad people out, right? Make sure my folks don't do too much stupid stuff, and be able to clean up the mess once it spills. Well, that's kind of a 2D type of problem. We're dealing on a bad day, it's probably 5 different dimensions, right? Because there's so much stuff that's outside of your control. You've got the ability, you've got developers and operations people and business teams that are actually not weaponizing, right? But they're building tools that could be used as weapons, right? And as a way to get at our data. So the job has also become much more complicated. And yes, we're talked about in the boardroom. Yes, we can usually get the funding for the stuff that we need if we can make up a proper business case for it. But yes, the job has gotten a lot more complicated. And for some people, they're like, this is awesome, right? I'm not just, kind of sitting there trying to figure out how to optimize my firewall rules, right? I'm trying to figure out how to architect a successful and secure business operation moving forward. And for somebody like me, that's awesome, right? The harder the problem, the better. A lot of other people are like, oh, I yearn for the days where it was like a rogue firewall rule knocked down a box and we had some outage and I was able to fix that in 10 minutes and be the hero. Sorry, we're not in that business anymore.
You're such a romantic about it. Hey, Anthony, so let's wrap up on this topic. And you feel free to jump in on the last one too. So one of the things that occurred to Matt Newfield, our co-host, is he, like some other people, went from CISO to some other title that incorporates both CISO and CIO, or the CIOs are starting to report to CISOs. Be careful what you ask for, like you said earlier. Why is that happening? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? What do we think about that, Anthony?
So this is definitely a topic that I get in trouble on. So let me just preface it with that.
Okay, I didn't do that. I didn't ask you first time.
No, so
for that reason.
It's really great. I actually think that most CISOs are not mature enough to have and drive the conversation with the board. They just haven't had the full remit of the P&L. They don't have the full visibility, and they've been locked in that microcosm of security so hard. Where CIOs have had more time, number of years of exposure to the board, and they've been able to be groomed and grow to do that. So I think putting a CIO underneath a CISO actually will be a big challenge, in so much as that the business will suddenly say, hey, why are we not getting this business throughput? The CISO now is responsible for delivering features faster. And what's going to be the priority for them? Features. Get it out the door, and security becomes that second hat. So I think that having a peer collaborative, almost a challenge type of function is one of the best situations, where having it the CISO over the CIO is a bit more of a risk for the business of itself. Now, a CIO over the CISO, I think that can work if the CISO has that event to the chief risk officer or something like that. Again, I would say the same thing. Most CISOs, there are very few that I think are actually mature enough to directly report to the CEO. Because they don't understand the business, they don't understand what they're really trying to drive value, and they think that we're just trying to save the world and make it safe. Like that's nice. After our customers are after we have revenue, after we're growing, after we're doing these things, then we need to be secure. It's like charity things for companies. It's a luxury.
It's interesting in that. At least the folks that I know that kind of came out of the security world and have become either CIO or more likely CTO, right? And CTO is an interesting, kind of title now, because again, we're not really building huge technology organizations anymore, right? We're trying to harness how technology can enable the business. So to me, that's more of a CTO type of role. But whatever we call them, right? To me, it gets back to leadership. So I can look, and Matt's not here, so I'll actually say a nice thing about him, which I would never do if he was actually on the call. But exactly. Hopefully he won't listen. But when you sit with Matt, and I've known Matt for a long, long time, he's a leader. So it doesn't surprise me that he's kind of transcended the CISO type of role and is taking on more responsibilities. Sometimes it's physical security, sometimes it's more technology operations, sometimes it's CTO, CIO, type of thing. But that has to do with being a leader as opposed to your general skills at doing security, right? As Anthony said, nobody gives a shit about that, right? I mean, it's just, it's important, but it's not going to move the needle of my business unless you're in the security business. But if you are a leader of people, right, and you can rally your team to achieve objectives over and over again very consistently, there's a lot of room in all organizations for people with that kind of skill set. And I think that's really, kind of the decision as security professionals start to face down what our career paths need to look like. There's an infinite amount of opportunity on the technical side of the house. And I would also say there's a similarly infinite opportunity on kind of the leadership side of the house too. But you kind of have to choose. Unless you're a unicorn, right? It's really difficult to be really good at both.
Let me try to couch it this way. And I think this is a really would be a fun exercise to do with a lot of CEOs, actually. If you said, hey, CEO of any large company, medium-sized company, you can have, on the one hand, 0% growth and 100% security, or 5% growth and a 5% risk that you're going to get breached. Most CEOs are going to say, we got to grow the company. They're like,
most?
There might be somebody out there who's like, I'm just going to run it, right? I'm just trying to play optimistic, I guess. But now most
it's a false dichotomy. I'm sorry, but go ahead. No, go ahead.
Right, most CISOs
I understand your point.
Hey, lock it down. We don't need any new customers. We're going to be 100% safe. And every business leader is going to be like,
that's your last meeting with the CEO, by the way.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it, right? Because they don't get what business they're in. They're not in the business of security. They're in the business of finance, healthcare, like insurance, whatever that is. And so that when you look at it from that trade-off, put it on a scale. Those business leaders are like, listen, 20 years ago, I cashed in my 401k, started this business. I was at 100% risk. I'll take a 10% risk to grow the business at 20%, like whatever that is. And security,
they don't have a choice, right? They're there to, in a lot of cases, grow. Unless, I mean, I can't think of one situation where somebody would, kind of say, and it all gets back to managing risk, right? It gets back to leading people. It gets back to understanding what business you're in. And it gets back to appreciating the technical disruption that every organization is undergoing right now. And if you can't be a partner with the folks that are driving that transformation, if you can't help them understand, kind of what is going to happen to corporate data based upon some of these decisions in a way that they understand relative to the business, and if you can't lead a team that's going to be asked to do a lot of really difficult things in not a lot of time, usually when all hell is breaking loose all over the place, it's not the right job, right? And that's okay. It really is. What's not okay is to fool yourself and spend a whole mess of time in a situation that's going to make you unhappy and you're not going to be very good at, right? Because that gets back to the wasted time thing, right? Yeah. And I don't know, you get to a certain age, right? I mentioned Anthony's a young guy, but you get to a certain age where you're like, time actually is really important. And a lot of the time that you spend doing a job that you hate, it's totally wasted time.
Well, I think the point's spot on. I mean, if you've been a CIO, that is not an easy job either. And the shelf life, the life longevity of CIOs isn't that great anyway. So be careful about doing that. I'd really make sure I was setting myself up for success and not just the next CIO to get fired. So, but I think it's some really good advice. Guys, it's been a blast. It's been fun. I wish we could share a digital beer right now, but we will do that when we see each other, hopefully at RSA or somewhere soon. Anthony, appreciate you joining us today. Any parting thought? Any words of wisdom to leave us with?
No, I think the last thing I would say is that while it's super tough, if people are open to getting the right coaching, the right mentoring, like having those open conversations and willing to learn, they can grow to what their company, mostly, I believe that most people can grow to what their company needs. Not this, you're not going to be Jordan. Just set that aside. But you can be what your company needs to be successful, and you'll get a lot of satisfaction and joy of that personally. And you can grow people in the same way. So I think that there's a light. You just have to kind of be willing to learn.
Mike, Yogi Berra of security with your great sayings.
My great analogies. Just go into it with your eyes open, right? And understand what you're being asked to do. And if that isn't in alignment with who you want to be, what you want to do, how you want to spend your days, don't wait until you fail at a job in order to call that out. Right. And that's just about being honest with yourself and really, just having that difficult internal dialogue to say, this is what I enjoy doing every day, and do that. Right. Don't overcomplicate it. Right. If you don't like what you're doing, do something else. Because again, all we have is time. And when you squander that time, it's gone. You don't get it back.
Mike Rothman, Anthony Johnson, thank you again so much. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. We'll check out another episode of CISO Talk. They're available online for replay, and join us for one of our live roundtables. We have some great stuff coming up. So Mitch Ashley signing off. And on behalf of my co-host, Matt Newfield, we hope you have a great day. Be safe, be secure. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right, welcome back. Next up, we've got our Something Old segment. This is from our very recent Predict 2022 virtual event. And this one is called the topic of it is software supply chain. What's all the buzz? So this one features Tracy Reagan from Deploy Hub and CDF board member, Steve Chin from JFrog, Mitch Ashley from Techstrong Research, and Amir Kushansky from Armo. They discuss what we need to do to get our collective arms around the component-driven software supply chain and how our DevOps practice will shift in the process. It is a great forward-looking conversation, totally worth checking out. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for joining our Predict 2022 panel. We're talking about software supply chain, sort of what's all the buzz, right? In the last year plus, supply chain's really been a big topic, and I think it means a lot of things to different people. We want to talk about that and the security implications. But let me first start out by introducing myself and our panel. I'm Mitch Ashley. I'm CTO with Techstrong Group and also principal with Techstrong Research. And let me start. Tracy Reagan, would you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Yes, I am Tracy Reagan. I am the CEO of Deploy Hub and the community director for a project called Ortelius. We are in the business of a microservice catalog, which helps centralize and puts all the microservices in one place. Their details, how to deploy them, who's using them, who owns them, and all the other kind of metadata that you need to really start managing a microservice architecture.
Awesome. How about you, Steve Chin with JFrog?
Hey, so I'm Stephen Chin, VP of Developer Relations at JFrog. I think as you guys know, we're the liquid software company. We help to enable continuous delivery from your source repository through to production, taking care of binary package management, security, and we care a lot about, in particular, open source security and the software supply chain. So this is a particularly relevant topic for us, which we want to see the whole industry get better at securing and maintaining.
Excellent. And Amir, if you would go introduce yourself last here from Armo.
My name is Amir. I'm the VP product of Armo. Armo is doing Kubernetes security from the beginning of creating a YAML file or a container image till runtime. Been doing cybersecurity for the past 20 years and product management for the past 15. And I think that this topic is super relevant, with attacks that we've seen in the last few months.
Yeah, it definitely has. Well, thanks to all of you for coming together to have this panel and have this discussion. So let's start out with I'll call it a working definition. We don't have to worry about, this is not the definition we'll publish on Wikipedia or anything. But what should we use as our working definition when we talk about software supply chain? Tracy, do you want to kick off that conversation, see if we can kind of land in a similar place?
Sure. So if we think about what a supply chain is, right? Let's just talk about what a supply chain is. A supply chain basically is the raw materials that goes into a product. And software is a product, and software has a lot of raw materials. And it starts at the lowest level of the stack, and those raw materials move up through the process to the top, which might be a jar file for front end. As we move into a cloud native environment and we start decomposing software, the supply chain becomes a little harder to track. And the security around it becomes harder to track. So what we're beginning to see in this discussion about a software supply chain is how do we manage all of the raw materials that go into our products. Now, I recently wrote a blog called the SCM is our new SCM because we used to call it software configuration management. Now we call it software supply chain management. And it sort of is the same thing, except it's been elevated over the course of the last few years, of the importance of really understanding what is going into your supply chain and how do you manage it and how do you secure it. And I believe that kind of covers what software supply chain management is all about.
Great. Stephen Mary, you want to jump in and mold, adjust, add to that in any way?
Yeah. No, just to add a little bit, and I think that this is the reason why it's top of mind, and why this is something which is particularly relevant for all DevOps software developers and companies which are deploying production software is the software supply chain, as Tracy said, is complex. We use a lot of open source libraries. We use a lot of components, and tracing the full path and all the components and capabilities which are in your deployed products is challenging. And I think attackers, hackers, people who want to exploit either commercial software or break into systems have also realized that where there's complexity, there's the opportunity for security exploits. And this kind of hit ahead with SolarWinds, which was a very prominent example of a security attack against a CI/CD system in a large distributed system, where they were able to attack an upstream member of the supply chain to then hit a variety of high value targets downstream. And the fact that this was both done on high value targets, it was an organized attack, and it was done against governments, a lot of government institutions, prompted the presidential order around securing the software supply chain, which includes mandating software bill of materials, or SBOMs, making sure that we're doing full security end to end. And when the things hit the government or the public sector, they naturally trickle into the private sector as well, for things we care about and secure. So in the past year, not only I mean, I think we've all been doing DevOps and been in the security space long enough that we've known about the potential for attacks like this. If you're not using vulnerability scanners, if you're not taking care of your dependencies, tracking what's in your product, you have a bunch of vulnerabilities. But now it's become visible to the entire software community that these sort of attacks are possible and dangerous when executed well. Oh, you're on mute, Mitch.
Yeah. Anything to add, Amir? Thanks.
Yeah. So I totally agree with Stephen Tracy, and I think that whenever these things are published, the community, we are kind of surprised that these things exist. But I think we shouldn't be surprised that governments are using, open source projects and other activities in order to create backdoors and to use malware. I think that what it gave me personally, it made me think that people today, they talk a lot about running container scanning and trying to find misconfigurations and things as such, which is very, very important. However, we have kind of neglected the runtime security part. And I think that these type of things require a runtime security because we can scan and find things that we know, but there are a lot of things that we don't know. And whenever we find them, like the famous Java vulnerability that was found 3 weeks ago, we are kind of surprised that it exists there. But I can tell you now, we are recording, at the beginning of 2022, we will find a lot of new things in many open source packages during this year. And I can tell you that we will continue to find these because it's an endless chase, right?
It is an endless chase. Yeah. And, I think that, not to point fingers at any particular platform, but we should have, what you said about that, the lower level, the operating system level has sort of been forgotten. We have a lot of vulnerabilities at that level, and it tends to be the level that people don't want to address quickly. If we think about the raw materials going into our software, that is like the foundation. And for whatever we have, we know when those vulnerabilities are there, but for some reason we go, okay, we're going to address them sometime later, because all the fun stuff at the top is what we want to change. It's almost like remodeling a house. You hate to spend your money on fixing a cracked foundation, but you'll put in a new kitchen. So I think sometimes that lower level of the stack does get forgotten, and changing and tracking the changes of that lower part of the stack gets forgotten. And with a Kubernetes environment, I think we're going to see more of that being tracked. That is going to become more of the parts that go into our software solutions, and not just a foundation that we're putting things on top of.
Yeah, really good point, because I think several things have put us in this position where we need to think holistically about software, not our piece of it. Because in the security world, we talked about shared risk. It's not outsourced risk. It's still your risk. It's just someone else has part of the risk too, that they're contributing to yours. Same thing in the software supply chain. And actually, it's as much about, yes, it's what is it, but it's also the integrity of it too, right? Security of it, and where did it come from? Is it what I think it is, and how do I make sure that integrity holds true? Make sense?
Yes. And the one area that we don't often talk about is the data. Right? It's the data is also a failure point, and it should be part of our raw materials that we talk about. Even though that data might be coming from end users, that data is still something that we should be thinking about in terms of the supply chain. I don't know if this is true or not, but we had this big bill for COVID relief come out, and I heard something on the news as I was on the treadmill, so I didn't really get it all. I was reading the captions that was going across, and it says close to $400 billion may have been siphoned off through bad actors because the states have such vulnerable systems that they were able to use, fake IDs and basically identity theft to grab, checks and funds that they shouldn't have had. So I think we have to always think about the data as well. So we have to think about the software supply chain from the lowest level, the foundational level, through the pieces that go into our software design and what we actually are writing our solutions, and the microservices and the libraries that are a part of that, and then the data that we're pumping in. Every single level has to be considered as part of the supply chain. So every user is part of our supply chain because they are adding data to our systems that can be compromised.
How do we think the industry is responding to this? We as a community of software creators, software users, as well as the vendor community. What's different? Is everybody just going out and creating a bill of materials? It's all good. Now we know what's in it. Obviously, it's more than that. But how is it changing how we're thinking about software and how we might create it ourselves or the companies that we work with? Who wants to take a stab at that?
So I think one of the ways which the industry is responding at large, and both Tracy and I are part of the new OpenSSF Foundation, which is a new Linux Foundation organization that's been created to specifically address open source security. And it's kind of taking the best minds, the best companies, and aggregating all of this collective wisdom into some actionable projects, working groups, and the deliverables which we can all use to better secure the software supply chain. And as Tracy was talking about, like defining the problem is one of the first things which we need to go after. And this is what the Salsa project at OpenSSF is designed to do, is basically to define the different areas in the software supply chain where you can be attacked or be vulnerable, starting from source systems, maybe submitting bad source code or compromising a system, going to build integrity. Is somebody hacking the code, which is getting passed to the CI/CD system? Is somebody bypassing the CI/CD system? Is somebody injecting a bad package or a bad dependency? And creating different tiered levels off of this for compliance. So are you able to check the provenance of the packages are you using? Are you able to use reproducible builds to verify that the builds that you're using is exactly what you would get if you built it off source code yourself? And like providing a standard set of industry guidelines, but also different levels of kind of how mature your software supply chain is to address different security exploits. And I think as we push this farther up the stack, as we help and enable open source projects to improve their security, especially highly used open source projects to get better audits of their code base, to make sure they're following best security practices. This is how we avoid things like what happened with the Log4j exploit, where it was a surprise to the industry in terms of the scale and the scope of what happens, but I don't think a surprise to the developers, because you look at the code base and they actually had the flags to disable it quite easily for the resolution of the service. So I think that in software projects, often we implement features, we add new capabilities, we do things to meet the customer requirements, but securing the system is as important as unit testing. It's as important as new features that are being added. And it's a part of the software development process, a memory muscle we need to get better at, all the way up the supply chain to the key open source projects, which we're all utilizing.
Oh, Mitch, you're on mute again.
Yeah, you're in.
Sorry, go ahead. My mute gets stuck here. Go ahead, Tracy. I think you were going to jump in.
I thought Amir was going to jump in, so I stopped.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to say that one of the challenges that I saw in the Log4j is that many of the channels that I'm following on Slack, WhatsApp, whatever, they were all talking about, I know that this thing exists. I can check it on my software, on my direct software, but I don't know if my supplier is using it. And now, how can I know? So, there was complete mayhem because people were looking to get something from their vendors. And they were stuck because, it's a recursive way, right? I'm using a vendor, that he's using a vendor, that he's using a vendor, that maybe is using. So, it gets very, very complicated.
Yeah, and you just described what some of the complexities around using microservices.
Mm-hmm.
I have a dream. My dream is that we have a single registry for these highly reusable and distributed components, and anybody who's using those components register themselves as being using them. So when we do have an issue, everybody can be notified exactly at the same time around the world that there is an issue with a particular open source component. I mean, why not? That's not an insurmountable task.
Because it will be great for attackers as well. They can go there and see that you're using something, and now they can use it to attack you.
Well, that's true. But open source, the more visibility, the better you're off.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. One of the things that Log4j pointed out to me is that there are definitely higher value targets. If you think about all the way back to SolarWinds and the Microsoft tools that it compromised to be part of the software creation process to inject, the code into the software supply chain that it resulted in getting distributed. In this case, you could have pick any product or open source project, whatever it might be. It could potentially be used in multiple places and multiple levels across your software stack, infrastructure, service providers, products. So you could have that one vulnerability in, a dozen, 10, 15, 20, 100 different places that has to be remediated. It isn't just one, let's go fix the library and we're all good.
Yeah, I guess that kind of speaks to the risk level of some of these components, right? How do we know how risky that particular component is that we're about to consume? We really don't necessarily know that.
Yeah, I think one of the highlighting another one of the projects going on at OpenSSF They have another project called Alpha Omega, and that project's specifically designed to do the split between the heavily utilized kind of high value target open source projects, or the alphas of the world, and Omega, which is kind of the long tail of open source projects that we're all using and which make us potentially vulnerable, but are not as risky high value targets. And then both directing funding, both project management resources, security research, investment into the alpha project, so giving them some direct funding and help to avoid the sort of security issues which Log4j or other high profile projects hit when they have a high disclosure vulnerability. But then also helping with this long tail of security exploits. And the JFrog security research team actually spends a lot of time looking for security exploits and adding them to our database, but they found a bunch of easily exploitable vulnerable packages in both the PyPI and the NPM module repositories. And a lot of the attacks, you don't even have to create it as a dependency or use it as a dependency and deploy it to production. The attacks are designed for the moment you pull down the vulnerable software package, the packaging script itself immediately runs malware and ejects itself onto the developer machine. And the majority of the attacks which we see are low severity attacks, right? They're info stealers. They're trying to get Discord tokens or other things off the local computer so they can execute low value attacks at scale against a lot of machines. But the same techniques that they're using to inject a vulnerable package into PyPI or NPM and to exploit local developer resources could be used to hack into an enterprise network by getting software installed onto the developer machines or the CI/CD machines, using that as a launching pad to access other systems, and possibly, like in the case of SolarWinds, sending out a binary to a third party as a downstream dependency, where it looks to the world like that company has created a valid package and they've signed it and they've certified it, but it actually is carrying a malicious payload. So I think that the risk here is both for the high value, large open source projects, kind of the Log4j incidents of the world, but also the long stream of malicious exploits, which could be used for targeted attacks against companies in a large scale software supply chain attack.
It's interesting. I'm curious everyone's thoughts about, how is this emerging into things that people can use? Are we talking about frameworks? Definitions of how to manage software supply chain? Is it tools? Someday every software package will have a supply chain module or whatever to it. Is it assessment tools? What do we need to kind of first crack open the challenges around software supply chain? What is emerging now, and what do you think we're going next?
All of the above. All of the above.
Was that a softball question? I didn't mean for it.
Well, I think that the industry is starting to look more closely at themselves, right, and try to determine what is it that we need to do. It's I can guarantee you that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of build scripts out there that still use wildcards to pull components into their binaries, and you could drop some nasty component in there, and that's as simple as it is just some wildcard definition that included pull everything in this directory, and somebody put something in that directory that shouldn't have been there. It's the definition of SolarWinds, something super easy and very malicious. So I think we're starting to take a look at ourselves and really understand how we can start managing these pieces. And I really want to emphasize that in where we're headed in cloud native, the infrastructure isn't static anymore. The infrastructure itself is dynamic. Mm-hmm. Not only the what's in the container, but how Kubernetes is configured and how we're linking microservices via APIs at runtime. So we're moving into a highly dynamic infrastructure now. And that highly dynamic infrastructure can have even more, potentially more vulnerabilities. But at the same time, when you get rid of monolithic, you have less ways to break in. If you have a lot of little microservices, you have to break into every single microservice or find the one that has the gateway to what you're trying to find. So we're starting to become better at what we do, but we still have a lot of work to do because this is a brand new way of thinking about software. And we have to think about, again, like I said in the beginning, the full stack, starting from, an SBOM should not include just what went into a binary. The SBOM should include everything about the data the platform is running on. What were the key value pairs that were used to configure it? Is there something we can point to in the SBOM that shows if the cluster itself was changed as part of that release? So the more data that we can pull into this picture, the more raw materials that we can report on, the better we'll be. And then tooling can become more sophisticated because it becomes then a data science project. And if we have the data, we can make the corrections. And the tooling then will start making the corrections. And I think that the industry is starting to respond, just like the OSSF is starting to really think about these different ways of managing it. We ourselves have Ortelius. We're trying to think about how to manage a microservices SBOM. You have an application that has a lot of microservices. Each one of those have an SBOM. How do you aggregate that at the application level? And then companies like Armo are thinking about Kubescape and how to track the changes at that level. So all of the above, and it's going to be a community effort and a community discussion to get it done.
Seems like a lot of disclosure too. We may not necessarily do today. I mean, you often see we use the following open source in our product, but they don't disclose everything else that's in their product. We have to kind of get comfortable with that transparency. Do we not?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious too. It seems like we have to think about two dimensions, at least, of this supply chain. One is in the software that we create, and the other is in the tools and processes that we use to create it. So it's not just the code we're creating; it's the pipeline, the DevOps pipeline, tool chain, however you want to think of it, and all the ingredients that go into that. That's potentially part of the software bill of materials too, right?
Absolutely, auditing the pipeline itself.
Yeah.
And I think we'll hear more and more about that as well as the DevOps community matures and we start thinking about auditing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think
go ahead, jump in, Jeremy. Yeah.
We are getting into a worse situation. The reason that I'm being apocalyptic a little bit is because we are in a huge shortage of people, developers, DevOps, security. Today business is king. Everyone wants to run really, really fast to develop things. They try to save 3 lines of code and take this open source that does everything, and while doing that they bring tons of vulnerabilities. They don't even know what vulnerability is, and then we ship this to production just to give another feature so users will enjoy it, and I don't see that we as an industry we kind of stop and say, security is important, not only for compliance reasons, but it's important because we understand that everything is connected today. Everything is out there. If you think about us being without technology, it's like the Stone Age, right? We rely on technology so much on everything that we do today that I don't see that it's going to change unless we change, our mindset and understand that these things happen. We need to be prepared for it. Sometimes, business needs to run a little bit, not as fast as it runs today, but we need to put the gates there and make sure that we are responsible and we deliver software that is good, solid, and not vulnerable or secure.
Well,
yeah, the need for speed can be a problem, can't it?
Speed kills some, right?
Speed can kill. Exactly. And I don't know if we're ever going to get the business not to be king.
Exactly.
They constantly, I just watched the movie, Don't Look Up, which is kind of hilarious but scary at the same time. But I think what Amir's talking about is the same. It's the same thing. Business is king. We got to pursue what business wants to do, and don't look up because you might see something really scary coming towards you.
Careful what you ask for.
That's a good analogy.
How about the lightning round here? We have a few minutes left. Maybe each take 30 seconds. If you're kind of just get your head around this topic of software supply chain, what do you think is at least one takeaway? Not necessarily the most important one, but one takeaway from this conversation we've just had. Tracy, why don't you start?
I would say revisit the SBOM process. That's the very first place you should start. Most companies may require some kind of an SBOM, but I don't think that the development teams take SBOMs as serious as they should, because they can enlighten us. Compared to SBOMs, and you have a difference report. It's pretty important stuff. And the other thing is, I have preached this for the last 20 years. Stop using wildcards. You've got those are two. If you want to get started right now, stop using wildcards. I know it's a pain to go through and have to list in some script every single file by name, but that will secure at the lowest level your build scripts and your packaging, your deploy package scripts. That will secure quite a bit and tighten it up. You've got to at least do those two things. So revisit SBOMs and start taking a serious look at how you're implementing wildcards in your build and deploy scripts.
Wildcards, if it's easy for you, it's probably easy for them too, the attackers. Stephen, you want to jump in, and then Amir will have you.
Yeah. I'm gonna add to what Tracy said. So adding to the wildcards, also don't use wildcard imports of dependencies. It's really tempting to just grab the latest, but that's typically a big source of trouble as well, because you're opening yourself to new vulnerabilities, and also it's harder to track exactly what version you're building against. On SBOMs, I totally agree with that as a starting foundation place, and we just released a new free and open source tool for building an SBOM called BuildInfo, so you can check that out at buildinfo.org. And then on top of this, I would also say, we talked a bit about OpenSSF, but I'd say, kind of follow the best practices of the giants. So there's companies and folks who've solved this problem or started to solve this problem. And by looking at the work they're doing in public forums and foundations like OpenSSF, that's a great starting place for you as a company or as an individual to find best practices and ways which you can help to secure your own projects.
Great. And Amir.
I would say that there is this new thing in the industry of shift left. I would say shift left, but don't forget your right. Look for the right. Make sure that you're covered there as well. The things that you don't know are the most dangerous one, not the things that you know. Right?
Great. And I'll just add, it's all the software, not just yours. It's the full picture. It's a holistic view of things. Well, thank you, Tracy, Stephen, Amir. Great panel. Wonderful. Love all your expertise and the fact that you share with us through this forum and Open Source Security Foundation and the products that you create. And folks that are watching, thank you for joining us for this Predict event. And be sure and check out these companies. We got some great technologies too, as well as some great thought leadership. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you all for the privilege of your time.
Yep. Thank you. This was great.
Hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article that looks at the DevOps journey through a cultural lens. DevOps is not just about technology. In many ways, the technology aspect of DevOps is finite, but the people, organizational, and cultural aspects are infinite. An important part of building a world-class DevOps process is understanding the cultural and organizational changes that are required to be successful and making those a priority. Many organizations have either not started their DevOps journey or are in the first generation of DevOps, which is creating a greater gap between elite and low performers. The business changes and delivery cycles are coming faster than ever, making it critical to use world-class DevOps. Pushing toward continuous flow requires technical, process, people, and cultural evolution to keep pace. To achieve a continuous flow, a continuous mindset is necessary. A continuous mindset requires new skills, new ways of thinking, new cultural norms, and new responsibilities. This article takes a look at what it takes for an organization to understand and adopt a continuous mindset for successful DevOps adoption. And we look at education in the era of the Great Resignation. It has been almost a year since the phenomenon known as the Great Resignation began, and while labor experts have provided a steady stream of speculation about why people are leaving their jobs, from frustration with pay to fear of COVID-19 to a desire to find positions that are more meaningful, they have yet to arrive at a consensus as to what those who are now out of work are doing with their time. I ask that question myself all the time. In the world of IT and tech, it appears that those who join the Great Resignation are spending their spare time growing their skills and improving their resumes by pursuing tech certifications. In 2021, the top online courses for 2021 were tech courses, many of which are offered by Google and provide the type of certifications that look great on a resume. In general, certifications provide a boost to job seekers. They communicate a commitment to professional development, as well as provide a reliable catalog of skills that one will bring to a position. For those looking to stand out, certifications can increase the chances that you'll get an interview. But while we love free certifications, many of them are unlikely to help someone start their career. This article hones in on the certifications that can make a real difference in a job search, as well as those equally important soft skills, including networking, communication, and conflict resolution, as well as creative thinking and time management. All right, in news, Dynatrace launched a bevy of updates to its portfolio that make it easier for DevOps teams to programmatically embed observability and other software intelligence capabilities within applications. The company also has extended the reach of its observability platform to now include all the major serverless computing platforms and extended its application security module to detect vulnerabilities and block attacks against application runtimes in real time using the framework defined by the Open Web Application Security Project, or OWASP. That module is based on Dynatrace Smartscape topology software and the Davis artificial intelligence engine to provide real-time visibility into IT environments, which then enables DevSecOps teams to better prioritize which vulnerabilities to remediate first based on their severity. All right, over on Container Journal, Commodore has launched an open source project dubbed ValidCube that promises to simplify Kubernetes troubleshooting. ValidCube is an amalgamation of 3 projects that are now more accessible through a single interface. Those projects include a kubevol project to validate Kubernetes configuration files, a kubectl neat project that cleans up Kubernetes YAML and JSON output to make it readable, and a Trivy project that scans for vulnerabilities in container images, file systems, and Git repositories. The goal is to make it easier to implement DevSecOps best practices by eliminating the need to master different approaches for provisioning complementary toolsets. All right, over on Security Boulevard, we have a breakdown of the alleged money laundering / cryptocurrency scheme by married couple Ilya Lichtenstein and Heather Morgan, who were both arrested last week on charges of attempting to launder the proceeds from the 119,574 stolen cryptocurrency tokens obtained via the hack of the Bitfinex platform in 2016. According to the Department of Justice, the duo laundered approximately 25,000 of those bitcoins and turned the virtual currency into cash. But the FBI and their law enforcement partners successfully recovered and seized 94,000 more bitcoins. For those doing the math, the 119,574 bitcoins stolen in 2016 had a value of $72 million. The present value of those same bitcoins has an approximate value of $4.5 billion. According to investigators, the couple created fake identities, used automated techniques to accelerate transactions as a means to obfuscate and spread out the stolen cash across geographic regions and virtual accounts. They worked diligently to keep the trail leading to their cache of Bitcoin secret and secure. This article goes into detail how the couple managed to evade detection for the past 5+ years and what contributed to their finally getting caught. It's really an interesting read. And finally, we look at Firewall as a service as a way to help keep remote employees safe. Cloud computing has revolutionized the world of work, and many companies migrated corporate data and applications to the cloud. This has improved productivity, flexibility, and reduced costs while driving innovation. But there are some downsides. With no fixed perimeter to protect, the interaction between users and enterprise environments has become much more complex. Firewalls are a corporate network's first line of defense, and the proliferation of web protocols and their use by hackers for targeted attacks using malware hidden in encrypted traffic have spurred the development of next-generation firewalls, which provide multi-layered security and deep packet inspection to enable organizations to better understand and control application performance and better prevent web-based attacks. In today's hybrid and remote work environments, however, that's not enough. Secure gateway and cloud access security broker solutions can effectively deal with the security issues inherent in web and SaaS traffic, respectively. But how can organizations ensure the safety of the rest of the data flow? This is where a firewall as a service systems come in. This article takes a look at this nascent technology that's growing in popularity and offers some tips to help organizations decide if the technology is right for them. All right, that is it for the headlines. I'll be back on Thursday with a whole new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Tim Grelling, who is the Director of Innovation and Security at Core BTS. Tim, thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I want to talk to you about something that is maybe not so much considered when we're talking about cybersecurity, and that's being mentally prepared for a cyber attack. But before we get started with that, I was wondering if you can introduce us to Core BTS.
Sure. Core BTS is a consulting company that helps organizations solve complex problems related to cloud and infrastructure security, and growing and experiencing a lot of activity related to security these days.
I can imagine. It seems like not a day goes by when we don't hear about another cyber attack or data breach or ransomware attack or whatever. But security is definitely top of mind for so many organizations these days. And so this idea of being mentally prepared for a cyber attack is one that I think it merits some serious discussion, because I don't think that organizations mentally prepare for cyber attacks. They certainly get their defenses up and improve their technology, but that whole mental state, I think, is something that's very important and should really be considered when thinking about an entire cybersecurity strategy. So tell me a little bit about how you guys kind of go about introducing this topic with your customers.
Yeah, it's we have an incident response team at Core BTS, and I joke with the guys that we're parts technology professional, part psychologist in these type of engagements, because whenever, especially with a catastrophic event like a ransomware, clients want to, rightfully so, get back up and running as soon as possible. But doing so, and trying to skip over processes, it can lead you back to the same place, right? If you try to skip processes, get back up and recovered, you might miss part of the recovery. So part of the response piece is managing folks and communications, right? Whenever your entire environment is down, there's a lot of panic, and you really have to go through processes systematically to make sure that you're doing it correctly. And part of that is managing expectations and managing, managing people, managing that mental side of it, to say, this is going to be, 3 days to get back up and running. This is going to be a week process. This is not something that's going to be fixed immediately. And you really have to communicate that to the business and work through that to make sure that you're going to be doing it correctly.
Do you think that organizations really kind of haven't taken that into account as yet, or as maybe as much as they should be? Do you think it's more of a, I guess, when we're talking about responding to a cyber attack, is it an emotional response that organizations are having, or is it more, kind of like, let's just throw more technology at it and hope that the problem goes away?
It really varies by customer, right? So depending on if they've been through an incident like this before, if they've thought about incident response, if they have plans, if they've gone through tabletop exercises, if this is the first time through and, the entire environment is down and they're losing revenue, it's complete and total panic. And it's, when are we going to get up and running? We need to be up and running again tomorrow. We're losing hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars, every day, every week. So managing that is absolutely key. We constantly preach to our clients that haven't been through a catastrophic event like that they need to prepare for that. They need to walk through the exercises, have tabletop exercises to think through those things before they actually experience those, right? It sounds funny to prepare to be to have an incident or prepare to respond. But IT, and organizations have gone through this with disaster recovery for years, right? What happens if our data center catches on fire, or if we have a connection to one of our facilities go down? How do we operate? Same sort of thing with incident response and cybersecurity, right? You really have to think through those. And one of the biggest keys with the mental aspect is including the business in it, because the business sides, they're there to service the client and make money. And during a lot of these catastrophic events, they can't do that, right? So walking through those different scenarios and having them involved and working through tabletop exercises really gets them thinking about, okay, well, what happens if, SAP's down, our email's down, if phones are down, right, for 3 days, 4 days. Walking through those type of scenarios definitely helps to get them to start thinking about that in a safer environment versus, yes, we're in the midst of it and everyone is running around trying to throw technology at it, trying to throw people at it to fix the problem, when you really have to work through that plan and really sit back and be systematic about it.
Yeah, I think some organizations are finally kind of coming around to the idea that it's really not a question of if they're going to get breached, but the fact that they are going to be breached. And so they really do need to be prepared for it. And right now, more organizations recognize that they could be the next target. A year ago, probably wasn't as prevalent that at least that line of thinking as it is now. So do you think that that's going to kind of help organizations, because maybe they're recognizing now, they're resigned to the fact that it's going to happen. They might as well be prepared for it. They might as well start the whatever they need to do now, so that when it happens, they're not going to be caught unaware.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with all of the higher profile events in the news, people are starting to realize that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? And it might not be a completely and totally organizational wide catastrophic event, but there's something that's going to happen, right? And you're going to be in incident response mode. You try to put as many controls in place to prevent or limit that damage, but you can't prevent everything, right? It's not cost effective. It's not realistic. So it's a matter of trying to prevent as much as possible, detect events as they occur, hopefully as quickly as possible, so you can contain it and then get back up and running, in an adequate amount of time. So I think that has, as more and more organizations experience these type of events, and they're covered by the news, it kind of becomes the norm, where people start to say, okay, well, what do we need to do? Do we have an incident response plan? Have we been through a tabletop exercise? Have we done a risk assessment to understand, really where our exposures are, right? Mm-hmm. Let's come in and think about, okay, if ransomware to come into our environment, how would we, respond to that? And could business operate, right? Do we have the right prevention measures? Do we have the right recovery measures? Because you can't prevent, because then when something happens, okay, well, how do we get back and recover? So you really have to focus on both prevention, recovery, and the detection piece to hopefully limit damage as much as possible as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I wonder how much not only those at the C level and the IT and security operations personnel are involved in this, but also the other employees in the company. It seems to me that part of this the prevention is everybody in the company understanding what what constitutes a data breach and what where they could be vulnerable and the steps that they can take to be more proactive in their security. So do you think that organizations are kind of kenning to this idea also, and more organizations are coming up with cybersecurity awareness programs for their employees so that they can maybe hopefully prevent that data breach or that ransomware attack?
Yeah, absolutely. I always say that, we always hear that, users are one of the, weak spots in the organization. And a lot of the breaches do occur with, someone clicking on a link or, accidentally giving up their password because of phishing, things like that. I say users are vulnerability that you can't fully patch, right? You can just continue to try to educate them and give them the tools to, do the right thing. But we're human, right? And we're all busy and something eventually is going to happen. So that's where IT and the business and security need to work together to do security awareness, as well as, education of users on what to do if you do click on a link, if you do get phished, right? Because that's, I had a user recently that's smart guy, no security, but was trying to do the right thing for a client and went out and downloaded what he thought was a Cisco agreement from some website that wasn't Cisco, right? Mm-hmm. Had malware in it, right? Luckily, our endpoint detection software stopped it from spreading. So it was just his machine, but he knew better. But he was trying to do the right thing for his customer, was in a hurry, couldn't get a hold of two people that would have that information. So he went out looking to try to solve the problem. Afterwards, he's like, yeah, that wasn't the smartest thing to do. But whenever things like that do occur, the user needs to know what to do, right? Who to contact. And you need to take those type of events and use those as lessons learned, right? Communicate that to other folks in the organization. That's, hey, here's something that, one of our, users did and what they should have done, what mistakes they made, and really use it as a teachable moment so that, you can personalize it for end users. Security awareness training, if you're doing the 1 hour video once a year, a lot of people will just sit there and click through it. But, trying to use real world scenarios and different methods to that education, I think is more helpful. And a lot of organizations are, moving towards that, different techniques and, micro trainings and emails and posters and, really doing a lot of different things to try to, again, stay in front of that problem.
Well, I think that a lot of progress has actually been made over the last year when it comes to cybersecurity awareness training. I'm hearing a lot more about it within organizations, but obviously, maybe not enough is being done, and we are going to have a big problem on our hands if we don't get our cybersecurity houses in order. And I love the idea of bringing the mental aspect of cybersecurity awareness and data breaches and recognizing that, this is going to happen. And so we need to be prepared now for it. And that's not only technologically, but it is mentally. So interesting stuff there. Tim, thank you so much for taking the time and having the conversation with me about this. Absolutely. And I do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned. Hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. I always tell you, we have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. I got 3 for you right now that are really awesome, and I'm hoping that you will be able to join. The first one is called How Secure Backups and Analytics Can Help You Recover from Ransomware in Hours, Not Days. This is happening Thursday, February 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It is sponsored by Rubrik. As ransomware attacks become more frequent and costly, having a solid ransomware remediation plan is a critical component of an organization's security posture. That said, simply securing a production environment is not enough. Bad actors are constantly shifting their attack strategies, often targeting backup data as well. Implementing a strong data security platform is key, and it is a key component of building a solid security posture, ensuring that there are no gaps in an organization's cybersecurity defense. So this webinar will discuss, among other things, why legacy backup and recovery products pose a risk to an organization, and some best practices for addressing ransomware threats through data security measures. Good stuff there. All right, the second webinar is called Day Zero Service Mesh. This one is happening Tuesday, February 22nd. This one is at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by Kong. A service mesh is the future of application connectivity. It delivers immediate value to any architecture by increasing application traffic security, reliability, and observability. At the same time, it can be challenging to understand and deploy service mesh in production. So Kuma, which is an open source CNCF sandbox project, takes a new approach to service mesh to build modern architectures across a variety of platforms, including Kubernetes and virtual machines. So this webinar will walk through how to easily set up a service mesh across multiple environments and automatically enable security and observability on any network. All right, the third and final webinar I want to let you know about today is called API Attack Protection. Don't overlook your number one attack vector. This one is happening Wednesday, February 23rd at 3 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It is sponsored by ThreatX. Every digital business relies on APIs to generate revenue, and every DevOps team innovates on the backs of APIs. Even with this explosive growth, however, APIs are consistently being overlooked in web application security programs. This webinar will cover the varied types of attacks methods used against APIs and introduce an attack-centric approach to API and web application security that provides full visibility into API and web application traffic to identify and block bad actors and bad behaviors to protect exposed vulnerabilities before damage can be done. Good stuff there. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. Please check back with me Thursday, when I will have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Rounding out today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we've got not one, but two conversations in The View with Vizard. In Mike's first conversation, he speaks with Kim Wines, who is the Senior Vice President and Marketing for Anchor, and they discuss why secure software supply chains start with an SBOM, or Software Bill of Materials. Great stuff there. And then in his second conversation, he speaks with Mirantis CEO Adrian Einel, and they reflect on the state of Kubernetes. This is happening a couple of years after Mirantis acquired Docker Enterprise, so they have a very unique insight as well. So both are great conversations. So we're going to do one, and then we're going to do the other for you. We'll roll them now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Kim Wines, who's the Senior Vice President of Marketing for Anchor. They have a new report out about attacks against software supply chains, and we're going to dive into that. Kim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
I think the report surfaces the fact that there's a lot of these attacks going on. And my first question to you is, does that surprise you, or has this been going on all along and we're finally taking notice of it?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. This has been going on all along, and we're starting to pay more and more attention because we've seen, a number of severe impacts, especially over the last year or so, from these attacks. And so people are starting to sit up and take notice.
Do you think that as we go along here that there's something we should be doing different about it? I mean, we hear a lot of talk about the software supply chain, and we hear about DevSecOps, and people are supposed to lean left, but it's not clear to me that people have a plan. What exactly are they supposed to be doing to address this requirement?
Yeah, I think we're going to shift into a world where software supply chain management becomes a practice, just like we've had traditionally supply chain management with our physical goods. So we're going to need to start to pay attention to what software components are coming into our organization, how they're being built into new pieces of software, and then anything that might be used either inside or outside of our organization. Things we might be delivering to customers or things we might just be deploying for internal use. I think the foundation of that is going to be the concept of the SBOM, the Software Bill of Materials, which is a concept that's been around for a long time in physical supply chains. You think of it like the ingredients in the food that you buy and that you eat. And we're going to start to use those SBOMs to have a complete picture of what's in our software. But it's not enough to create an SBOM. We have to then use those SBOMs to help us with these attacks. So as an example, we recently had the Log4j vulnerability, which was a big 0-day vulnerability that came out in December of 21, so just about a month and a half ago. And most organizations were left scrambling. They were trying to figure out where Log4j was running in their organization. And that can be really difficult to do. You're out there trying to scan endpoints, you're trying to scan your software repos, scan your registry, scan your production systems, which is time consuming, often has a lot of blind spots. So instead, if we start moving to a world where we've generated an SBOM for all of the software that we build and use, maintain that SBOM in a repository, now when we have the next 0-day, it's really just a matter of searching, essentially, that repository to find out what components are there and are we impacted. And it's not just an issue for 0-day vulnerabilities, it's really an issue for our day-to-day use as well. So for example, one of our customers is a company that produces a lot of software. Some of that they ship to customers, some of that they put on a SaaS system. They maintain sort of a completed SBOM of all the software versions that they release. Now they can continue to monitor that for any new vulnerabilities that might arise, even when it's not as news-making as something like Log4j.
How will those SBOMs be updated? Because it seems to me, at least, that we're seeing, particularly with containers, things are being updated more frequently. The applications are changing. So the SBOM has to be essentially a living document.
Totally, completely a living document. And if you think about it, we have automated processes now for that continuous building, continuous delivery. So we have our CI/CD pipelines, we have our DevSecOps tools. And so we need to automate those processes in those existing tool chains that we're already using. So we need to be able to scan in our CI/CD system, scan in our container registries, scan when we're delivering things into production so that we are checking at each point in the process, creating a new SBOM and preserving that SBOM so that we can monitor those systems even after they've been deployed.
Who's in charge of creating the SBOM and, for that matter, securing the software supply chain? Is it the security team, the DevOps team, the developers themselves? How are we going to approach this?
Yeah, I think it's really a collaborative effort. So, typically for the developers, we want to embed automated tools into the tools they already use, not requiring them to leave those tools, but notifying them in the ways that they need to be notified when there's an issue. So if we're doing a build, we find a security vulnerability, then maybe that needs to get filed as a ticket in Jira, for instance, if that's the system that the developers use. The DevOps engineers are basically responsible for, integrating these security tools into those platforms. They want to make sure this all runs on a smooth basis. And the product security team, or the security team, is really responsible for the overall oversight of understanding, the reporting and the auditing and what controls and policies do we need to put in place. So they really need to collaborate together to make this all work smoothly.
We saw that the Biden administration put out an executive order talking about the need for SBOMs, among other things. Do you think that that will be a catalyst for other enterprises following suit? Will they use the same basic methodology?
I believe you're exactly right on that. So with that requirement, as that comes into full force, any organization that's providing software to the federal government, which is going to be nearly every software company, and certainly other companies as well that don't produce what we traditionally think of as software, but that has software in it. So think about devices, for example. And then in addition, we have systems integrators that are building systems for the federal government. So all of these organizations are going to have to follow the new rules, essentially. And other organizations will look at that and say, hey, let's just piggyback on that. Let's ask those companies for the same things that they have to produce for the federal government. And then let's use that information to help our security processes as well.
I think we hear a lot about this shift left idea, and the notion is that somehow developers are going to become more security conscious. And to what degree is that realistic, or do we need to figure out a way to let the organization itself lean left towards the developers and make it easier for them to build secure applications without necessarily slowing down the rate of application development?
Yeah, that's critical, right? Developers feel good when they're delivering new capabilities in their software to customers that want to use it. And that's not just developers, that's the organization as a whole. They don't want to slow down velocity. So we have to figure out how to optimize the process. So this is where automation is critical. So of course, we can put automated tools into those processes. But the next problem becomes, once we've discovered what the security issues are, how do we get them remediated? And one of the biggest issues that really frustrates developers is the level of false positives. And so it's really important that we work to bring down that level of false positives, because otherwise developers are spending their time chasing down issues that aren't real, trying to explain to security why they don't plan to fix an issue because it doesn't impact their code. So that is something that we've really worked a lot on with our technology with Anchor Enterprise to best optimize and reduce that rate of false positives, and also to bring a feedback loop, so to speak, from the developers back into the system, so that as they're seeing things that are out of whack, they can make adjustments in the system in order to correct those false positives going forward. So I think that needs to be a big area of focus to really help decreasing velocity.
Do you think this issue may ultimately lead people to embrace containers more aggressively? And I'm asking the question because, in theory at least, it's easier to rip and replace a container that has a vulnerability in it than it is to patch a monolithic application. So might this just force this whole shift or accelerate the shift?
Potentially. I mean, I think the shift to containers is already well underway, and I don't think there's any stopping it. This is something that we've asked in our survey, and we've seen that most people are in the, intermediate stages, at least, if not advanced, of their container adoption. And they're working their way through their applications. Certainly, most, if not many, net new applications being built today are going to be built with cloud native technologies, which will include containers. Of course, we have a big, backlog of legacy stuff that over time will begin to migrate. But I don't think there's any stopping the container train. But we found in our survey that there are, even with containers, people are still concerned about security. One of the things that containers do is they let us decompose those applications into those microservices, which has a ton of benefits, including what you mentioned. It becomes a little easier to update. But it also means we have a lot of dependencies coming in from many different sources. And sometimes it's not obvious what all of those dependencies are. Some of those may be dependencies that the developer's not clearly aware of. And so using tools to be able to scan, to identify those dependencies, to put them into the SBOM, and then to be able to monitor those against not just vulnerabilities, but against other security issues that might come up. So this can include things like malware and secrets that might be left within the code.
So if I understand it correctly, we may have a large portfolio of monolithic applications and microservices applications side by side that need to be secured. Do you think organizations are prepared for that strategy? Do I centralize that, or does each one require its own platform? How do I think about that?
I think it's the way we've been living for quite a while, right? We're always refreshing the technology that we use, from the move to web-based applications, from client server, from the move to cloud-based applications now. And so this is something that IT organizations have been dealing with for decades now. So I think each one will find its own way. I do think that with this software supply chain management process becoming more critical, I believe that people will be centralizing certain aspects, right? We need to decentralize certain pieces. We need to plug into the tool chains that each of your development teams has, because you probably have multiple tool chains across your organization. You need to work with the systems they already use. But then we need to take the information, such as the SBOMs, and be bringing those to a centralized repository so that when the next Log4j or the next vulnerability comes along or the next SolarWinds, we're not scrambling. Instead, it's a simple search of a repository as opposed to, scramble mode and chaos for days and months afterwards.
How automated can this process get, and how smart can it get? And I'm asking the question because often developers will postpone scanning something and then they'll wait till the end of the week and then the scan takes forever and then they're going to have a cup of coffee somewhere and productivity seems to drop while they're waiting for a scan. Is there a better way to think about this so that the scan just kind of runs at some defined point when it's supposed to?
Yeah, I think today, really the best practice there is to certainly be scanning at each build. And so to tuck that into your CI/CD pipeline to automate that process so those scans run on an automated basis. Any issues that arise can then bubble up through your general ticketing system that you have. And then it doesn't become, build up and become a lot of cruft that you have to deal with, right? So it's that idea of shift left, right? Shift left started years ago with the idea of testing as we go along. So the idea of security and scanning for security, each step in the process at each build, I think makes it much, much easier for the developers to deal with the output.
Mm-hmm. So other than hanging out on your website, what's your best advice to organizations right now as they look at this challenge and they think through these issues? What do you see organizations that are doing it successfully focusing on?
Yeah, I think you need to really get the thought into your organization about how are we going to holistically manage our software supply chain? How do we bring some practices that we might have had in place already and spread those across our organization? And how do we develop new practices that we're going to need in this new world of software supply chain management? So one of the key foundations there is to start thinking about the software bill of materials. How can you not just generate a software bill of materials as you're going through your development process? How can you not just scan maybe the open source coming in? How can you maybe start asking vendors that are providing you software for a software bill of materials? And then not just how do you get that software bill of materials, but what do you do with it? How can you now use that for the next security vulnerability that comes up? How can you use that to monitor on an ongoing basis your software applications that have been delivered or deployed? I think starting to think about how you can get those pieces into place is really critical to building this process and practice in your organization.
All right. Hey, Kim, thanks for spending some time with us. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Mike. Great being with you.
All right, guys, back to you in the studio.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Adrian Einel, CEO of Mirantis. It's been 2 years since the big deal with Docker that brought across all the technologies for the enterprise from those guys and put it in the Mirantis portfolio, and it's been expanding ever since. Adrian, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike. Great to be here.
Where are we now as far as the migration to containers and microservices and Kubernetes and all these platforms? I feel like we've been talking about it off and on now for 5 years, and every year we say this is the year, but I wonder if it just takes longer than people think, or are we just moving faster than people realize?
Actually, it's skyrocketing. And I'll give you an example. We have this product called Lens, which is very popular, maybe the most popular IDE for Kubernetes, which Kubernetes SREs use. And to give you some data points, Lens had about 10,000 users 20 months ago. Today, it has 450,000 users worldwide. And they're managing about 250,000 individual Kubernetes clusters. in all kinds of size companies, from world's largest companies like Apple or SAP or AWS, all the way to a small indie shop somewhere in India or in Scandinavia. So that gives an idea for the adoption of Kubernetes at massive scale. So yeah, it's skyrocketing. It's totally there.
Early on, a lot of this was driven by developers, and now I think there's more IT operations people involved. So is this a bottom-up phenomenon still, or is it being driven more by operations folks that like the efficiency that Kubernetes provides?
You're absolutely right. Early on, it's the developers who just moved to containers and said, this is the way we'd like to work. But now we're seeing more and more where even CIOs and VP of IT operations are just providing mandates into their infrastructure to embrace Kubernetes and containers as the standard, because one is their customers are requesting it, which are the developers and the application owners. And second, because it's just so much more efficient, it leads to an infrastructure that's much easier to operate. It's standardized, it works across clouds and on-prem. So it has all kinds of benefits. So it's both. It's the developers pulling, and it's now also IT operations and IT leadership just mandating it as a new way of doing things.
As we go along here, do you think people are appreciating the complexity of some of these applications? If I look at microservices, there's a lot of dependencies. If I look at Kubernetes itself, there's a lot of knobs to turn, and people use the phrase wall of YAML files, and they get a little intimidated. So I know we promised people that things would get easier and that we'd all have flying cars by now, but are things getting more complex?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There's a lot of power in Kubernetes and containers and in microservices, but with that power comes a lot of complexity, as in cloud services or cloud platforms in general. And in fact, this is one of the key problems that we're solving for our customers. How do we take a technology that's super complex but very powerful and turn it into something that's very, very easy for people to use and very, very easy to operate? Yeah, so yeah, it is complex, but through technology, through automation, through software, the complexity can be removed or hidden from most people so that people can take advantage of containers and Kubernetes very, very easily and not have the headaches of knowing every single detail.
What is your sense of how much of the infrastructure is going to be managed by an internal IT team? Or are things shifting to this kind of as a service or managed service approach, and because people want to spend more time writing code?
Yeah, well, we are very biased there. We have our unique point of view. The philosophy that we're taking is we like every single company on the planet to become a zero ops company, a zero ops business, because we fundamentally believe that for the vast majority of businesses there, operations is not a place where you can create a ton of unique value. And even then, maybe the best possible operations architects and engineers can be more focused on designing, crafting new services, new platforms, rather than trying just to keep the trains moving and up and running. So yes, we believe that everything should be delivered as a service, including infrastructure, that even on-prem, people will want a true cloud experience and as a service experience with zero operations. And this is central to the value that we provide our customers. Not everybody is there, but we see more and more companies actually totally embracing this and shifting their most critical talent towards creating new services, creating new products, creating new software versus running ops.
Early on, Mirantis, of course, was closely associated with OpenStack. What's the relationship between OpenStack and Kubernetes these days? Sometimes you look at it and Kubernetes can run on OpenStack, OpenStack can run on Kubernetes, the two run side by side. What are people using both, or is it in either or?
Yeah, the relationship could not be better, actually. And this was part of our playbook and our rationale for acquiring Doc Enterprise. We, even before we acquired Doc Enterprise, we containerized OpenStack, and we ported it to run directly on Kubernetes, just like any other microservices application. So you can think of OpenStack really as a very complex microservices architecture and application. So right now, the way we ship OpenStack to our customers in our latest release, in our next generation product, is as running on top of Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is the substrate on which everything runs on our platform, including OpenStack. And that gives customers a tremendous amount of flexibility and choice, because they can have a unified fabric. If they need virtualization, they can put OpenStack on top of it. And then some customers, you're absolutely right, put yet another layer of user-centric or workload-centric Kubernetes on top. So you can have this sandwich where you can have Kubernetes as the base layer, OpenStack on top, and yet again, more Kubernetes clusters on top of OpenStack. And that's a very typical architecture that people run and give people a tremendous amount of flexibility and benefits.
We live in this multi-cloud world. Some of it is on purpose. Most of it is by accident. But we talk a lot about hybrid cloud, and Kubernetes seems to have a lot of potential in that space. So do you think we will see Kubernetes on-premise and in the cloud, and that will become the foundation for our future hybrid cloud ambitions?
Yeah, we definitely see Kubernetes on-prem and in the cloud, and a combination of the both. I'm not so sure that hybrid cloud it depends very much what we mean by hybrid cloud. So we see very few cases where customers split an application between on-prem and public cloud. What we see much more frequently is that customers categorize their applications in cohorts, and certain cohorts are being moved onto public clouds, other cohorts are being kept on-prem. But there is one common unifying theme, which is that the vast majority of customers want their development teams to use open standards and cloud-native standards for the development frameworks and for the infrastructure they use. And this is where Kubernetes comes in extremely handy, because that means that people that develop on applications from or on-prem target really use the same frameworks and the same tools and methodologies that people who develop in the cloud. And it also means that the customers can move those apps wherever they want at any point in time with relative ease and have a lot of portability, which is why we believe that anything and everything that will remain on-prem as an infrastructure will eventually also migrate towards cloud-native standards centered around Kubernetes and containers, so that developers and application owners have the same experience in a public cloud and on-prem.
Mm-hmm. Post-COVID, we saw a lot of spending on IT, and a lot of it driven by digital business transformation initiatives to varying degrees of success. Do you think we're going to enter a new period, though, where there's going to be a lot more focused on the cost of IT and trying to contain that a little bit more? Because we did go through a period where almost out of desperation, we were spending on IT to hopefully drive reinvention, but maybe some of the old disciplines will be coming back.
I don't know. It's a very, very good question. I feel that the emphasis is going to be on measuring return on investment in a much more rigorous way rather than just pure cost. I think companies would very much continue to invest very heavily on those digital initiatives that really deliver good results or have the promise of phenomenal results and are transformative for businesses. And at the same time, they will question every single dollar that's just spent on keeping the lights on, or any kind of dollar that is really not producing meaningful competitive advantage for business. So that's going to be, people are going to take a very hard look at that. And we know all from our experience that a very large portion of IT budgets today are still being spent on maintaining legacy applications, maintaining legacy enterprise data centers. And that is going to be, I think, a target for cost savings and freeing up capital to invest in new software development and new initiatives that can really transform the business. So I'm not sure it's going to be cost reduction as much as how can we actually ensure that we get a real return on the money that we spend on information technology.
Mm-hmm. We also hear a lot about securing the software supply chain these days. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if people have yet to fully appreciate this, but one of the benefits of microservices and containers is it's easier to rip and replace something that has a vulnerability in it than it is to patch a monolithic application. So do you think we'll get to a point soon where people will start building more in microservices because of security concerns?
That's a very good question. We do have a lot of very security sensitive customers throughout the federal government, Department of Defense, national labs. That's not just in the US, but in other US friendly nations around the world. We have a lot of security conscious customers as well, whether it's banks, pharma companies, healthcare companies, and the like, payment services like Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, and so forth. So we do believe that security is very much top of mind for anybody and everybody that's running digital initiatives these days. And we do see absolutely that people totally realize that the container gives you just, I think, the most elegant, the most safe way to patch vulnerabilities today versus any other technology that's out there. And you're absolutely right. That may yet be another driver for people wanting to containerize so that they can respond much more quickly and predictably and reliably to security threats.
Mm-hmm. Right now, there's no shortage of Kubernetes platforms and distributions. So ultimately, in your mind, what differentiates one provider from another? What should people be thinking about?
Well, I do think there is a shortage, or there is a very limited number of platforms that are actually proven at scale, and we fit into that category. If you take the 5G network of AT&T that runs on our Kubernetes plus OpenStack platform on top in 200 regions, or if you take what we do for Visa or many other large customers around the world, actually doing it at massive scale is challenging, and doing it securely, being able to update and patch and operate and guarantee results is quite difficult at enterprise scale. And when you put that lens on, I think the number of players that can actually do it with a high degree of quality is very small. It's less than you can count on one hand.
Do you think it will ultimately get easier? One of the criticisms you hear about Kubernetes in general is you're confronted with this wall of YAML files and nobody knows how to cope with that. So ultimately, I wonder if people are still intimidated by the platform and maybe we need this whole level of abstraction above it, and that's where we're moving to.
That's absolutely right. And that's in part what we're betting on. And what you will see coming out from Mirant is more and more a focus on application owners and developers, and how can we remove essentially all the complexity of Kubernetes, or having to know something about Kubernetes from the developers. So the newest offerings that we launched, like DevOps Care powered by Lens and Lens Enterprise, are all about making it super easy for the application owner and developers to actually build apps, inspect apps, run apps, update apps on top of the Kubernetes platform without having to be Kubernetes experts. My personal view, and I know people have different views in the industry on this, but my personal view is that the average developer does not want to know anything about Kubernetes at all. They just want to build the code that meets their end users' needs and push it down to the platform. And everything else has to be done through automation.
All right, well, this is the second anniversary. Assuming there's a third, what are we going to be talking about in a year from now? What's your predictions for 2022?
You mean for us as Mirant as a company?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what we're focused on. One of the things that, and there are many things that happened that we're super proud of. And I think the most important that happened that we're proud of is just how we delivered for our customers and for our people, for our colleagues, for our employees in the company, that we've gone through the past 2 years. as a successful and robust business, continuing to grow and continuing to invest, and doing it entirely out of our own funding, being cash flow positive. So it's been absolutely fantastic. But one of the things that all of us as a team are most proud of is that we have a group of customers, and it's a sizable group of customers. It's not just 5 or 10. It's a very significant group of large customers who have been growing at 400% per year on average with us over the past 2 years. So these are, we call them fast growers or hyper growers. And I believe what we will be talking about in a year from now is these hyper growers growing even faster, growing maybe not just at 4x a year, but maybe growing as high as 10x a year. That's our ambition, getting them to much larger scale, much, much faster, and having a lot more of them.
Very good. Hey, Adrian, thanks for spending some time with us.
My pleasure. All the best. Take care.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
Okay, awesome. This was terrific. Thank you, Mike, for doing this.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, that is a wrap for today's Techstrong TV broadcast. Hope you enjoyed today's conversations as much as I enjoyed bringing them to you. We have a couple things coming up before we close things out. I want to remind you about. First up, we've got a virtual event happening next week, I believe it is. It is the IBM Automation Insights virtual event. That one is happening February 23rd. Again, that is a virtual event. We also have, following on the heels of that, March 1st, we have a virtual event sponsored by Sneak that is called Know Your Code, Open Source and Supply Chain Summit. Great topic there. We also have another one right after that. We are just rocking and rolling on these virtual events, folks. This one is sponsored by Salt Security, and it is the API Security Summit. That one is happening March 3rd. So those are our 3 virtual events that we have coming up for you. We also have some live events coming up at the end, starting at the end of March. We have the our Techstrong live events. We have one related to DevOps / cloud native, and then another for cybersecurity, and these are day-long events. We're going to be presenting them throughout the country throughout the year. The first one kicks off March 29th in Atlanta. We have one day, as I said, devoted for DevOps Cloud Native, another day devoted to cybersecurity. We're going to be doing these in other cities, including DC, so many different places, San Francisco, I think, Los Angeles. I can't quite remember all of them, but you can check out the entire lineup on techstrongevents.com. We also have our Initech events that are coming up. We've got Austin and Dallas. We also have Houston on the schedule, as well as Oklahoma City and Washington, D.C. So we're going to be everywhere, it seems like, this year. So good stuff there. But you can check out everything that we've got going on here at Techstrong, techstrongevents.com. Go to that web address, and you will be able to see all of the lineups, all the shows. You can check out the agendas, see the lineup of speakers, and register for the events themselves. I will hope to see you back here on Thursday for another Techstrong TV broadcast. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.